occur in advance of the council meeting. The briefing session is not a decision-making forum, but rather an opportunity for councillors to ask questions and seek further clarification on items listed in the agenda. Kaya Marman, Kaya Yoga, Kaya Bridie, Yana Nook, Nalak Karij Winjialak Nini, Nalak Karij Nija Bujabal, Wajak Nunga Bujalalak Nini, Kura Kura Nijie Burawan. On behalf of the town of Bassendean, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land on which we meet, the Wajak people of the Noongar Nation. May their campfires burn forever. I'd also like to remind people that our meetings are recorded and uploaded to the town's website. We do have quite a significant number of items to come through tonight, so I will be keeping everyone to the time limits. Now we'll move on to the next item, which is attendances and apologies. I have one apology from Councillor Wilding. Do we have any other apologies? I don't believe so. Declarations of interest. I have a declaration of interest for item 9.4. It's a proximity interest in that I live across the road from the property in question. So there is a deputation on that item tonight where I will make myself absent from this meeting, and also I will organise for that item to be brought to the first in the reports because Councillor McLennan, Deputy Mayor McLennan, will take over this meeting to preside for those items. I have no announcements at this time. There are no petitions. We will now move on to statements by members of the public. Now, I already have some statements that have come through. So the first statement is from Mahoney Tidy of Parker Street, Bassendean. It's in respect to 9.3, which is the proposed tavern and use not listed microbrewery at 73 to 75 Old Perth Road, Bassendean. I'll just very quickly read out this statement. I would like to express how greatly I feel this would benefit the local area and the revitalisation of the Old Perth Road precinct. The area and this particular building has been neglected and has become an eyesore to the town. So many of the surrounding businesses will benefit from its development due to the increase in foot traffic along the whole precinct from the train station and the ability to order food from already established businesses. Please do not let a lack of parking on site stop such a fantastic development opportunity. Other areas such as Mount Lawley and Maylands have little parking but are thriving areas due to businesses such as this. Thank you. There is another statement from Alice Perish at Kathleen Street, Bassendean, again for the same item, 9.3. The addition of the proposed tavern and use not listed microbrewery is so welcome and beneficial to Old Perth Road. It will bring much needed life and vibrancy to this part of the street. Imagine having a walkable street where patrons can enjoy the nightlife by arriving at a train station, heading to the Bassendean Hotel and then to Bertie's, and finally the new proposed tavern and use not listed microbrewery. So-called lack of parking is a complete non-issue. With train access and walkability for locals, only minimal parking would be required. Compare this strip to Mount Hawthorn or Maylands, where parking is absolutely terrible, yet these areas thrive. Why? Because of the venues. People will make it work. We as locals are so excited for this new addition. Please don't let red tape get in the way. Many thanks, Alice. There is another statement from Ms. Carol Seidel of Broadway, Bassendean. This is in respect to item 9.4, which is short stay accommodation at lot 52 Broadway. I wish to convey to you my concerns that firstly the applicant's property is outside of the town of Bassendean zone for short stay short-term accommodation from the town centre zone. The officer's recommendation that a 12-month trial should be considered and accepted even if it's outside the zone is not recognising council policy that was implemented by the councillors. I think the council need to consider that we have a serious housing shortage here in Perth and the rest of the country. I find this morally wrong that the applicant considers short-term accommodation as the best business model when in fact a good return for the property could be achieved through long-term rental. It is a well-known fact that short-term accommodation has a great impact on availability of long-term rentals currently here in Australia. Approval of this item will contribute to the housing shortage. There is no quick fix here. Sorry, there was a lack of punctuation on some of it, so apologies for that. Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, I will open the floor to other statements. We are just in statement time at the moment, not questions. So if you have a statement, you're welcome to come up to the microphone. I also will note that several people have sent through emails saying that they're going to be here to do deputations. Deputations are a separate section to the agenda that we will come to. So tonight, if you have any short statements, if you'd like to come to the mic, put your hand up and come to the microphone. Thank you. If you would state your name and address, sir.
Alan Copleston, 81 Parker Street. This is to do with 9.1, which is the community. It's just not turned on.
Is it on?
It says on. Okay. The community transport that's been going on for a while now. I read through the report that's come back after our special meeting, and there were just so many things that I just didn't think were right or were confusing or something, didn't address the things that have been brought up at the special meeting. So I took the time, I've emailed all the councillors and the CEO my version of that report with notes, some 45 notes, because to me there's just lots of issues with that, and that's pretty much my statement. You guys can look at your leisure before you have to vote on it next week. I won't be here next week because we're on holiday, which is sad, isn't it?
So thank you, Mr. Copson. We did receive that email. I haven't had a chance to actually read it yet.
Well, because the agenda only came out on Sunday.
Actually, no, the agenda came out earlier than that.
Well, that's the first I could see it. I looked at it every day because I knew it was coming in. And so we were travelling yesterday. I've only had today to answer 45 comments on it. It actually took me a while today, especially kids and everything else.
So thank you, Mr. Coppleston. I'm sure that all the councillors will read your document as well as the administration.
It does take some consideration because it affects what you saw at the special meeting. Some 400 people signed a petition with no coercion from us at all, and it's a concern for people.
Thank you, Mr. Coppleston. Okay. Anybody else who would like to make a statement? Yes, sir, if you'd come to the microphone and your name and address, sir.
I can talk pretty loud.
It's more for the recording.
My name's Corey Evans.
So Corey, just give us a minute, because if you, there we go. We're going to try, because we try to catch it for the actual recording.
Yeah.
So,
Do you want to keep close up?
yes, if you like.
Start again. My name's Troy Evans. I live at 3 Prospect, Loop in Bassendean.
I don't have the numbers or anything, but it's in regard to 52 Broadway short stay accommodation application. My partner Tristan, who purchased the house in ruins, pretty much as it demolished, has invested blood, sweat and tears into that property. A lot of money has gone into that. He's very proud of the work that he's done, and many people that know him are as well. To put it as short stay accommodation, I feel that he can control better who resides in that premises in short stay. I've lived in Bassendean for 20 years, Eden Hill and Bassendean. I've lived next door to rental properties and there is no control. We've lived next door to drug addicts, violence in the home, and you know, having to go to court myself on several occasions for abuse in the home. Lost for words. So I just really want you to you know, feel free to ask him any questions, have a look at the house, what he's put into that. He's done a tremendous job, and I think if you drive past that property now, you'll see how good and respectful it is looking. So that's just what I wanted to say. If you can please consider that in the application. He's very determined to make it work for not only himself but for the community as well.
Thank you, sir. Okay, anyone else with a statement? Okay, so with that, we will move on to public question time. And again, I have some questions that have been sent through, so I will deal with those first. The first question, well, there's a couple of questions from Liam O'Neill of Chesterton Road, Bassendean. And Liam has asked some questions in respect to items 9.4 and 9.5. Are short stay accommodation properties rated as commercial properties? I'm going to read these questions out and then ask one of the officers to respond. If no to one, why not? And where a property is used for short stay accommodation, has the town applied to Landgate to have the property revalued with a gross rental value reflective of the value of rent obtained by the owner? And if not, why not? So could I ask Mr. White if you would address those questions?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. So in relation to the first question, no, the town has, we have considered the issue, but have not sought to rate short stay accommodation as commercial at this stage. If no, why not? Two primary reasons. The first is that under the town's objects and reasons for differential rating, for a property to be rated as commercial industrial, it must be zoned under the local planning scheme, under the town planning scheme as such, and at the moment short stay accommodation is zoned residential. The second reason is that the additional rates revenue at the moment simply just doesn't warrant the administrative effort required to not only identify short stay accommodation throughout the town, but then also to monitor it and police it. The town imposes currently a 3% premium on its rates for commercial and industrial property, which for an average residential property perhaps with a gross rental value of say $30,000 a year would amount to additional revenue of around $79 per year for the town. So on that basis it's not justified at this stage. The third question was where a property is used for short stay accommodation, has the town applied to Landgate to have the property revalued? The answer is no. And the last question is if no, why not? And I'd revert to the previous response in terms of the value versus the administrative effort required. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I just note that we're going to move on to deputations shortly, but I do note that Mr. John Eck, are you in the chamber, sir? You had some questions in amongst your deputation, so I wondered if you wish to ask those questions separately, or whether you, because we've just gone past question time, and I wanted to ascertain whether you want to ask those questions now before we go to deputations.
I'm happy either way. I'm happy to ask them through the second session, or if you'd like me to ask them now.
Okay, we'll leave it in the deputations then, okay? Mr Busby, you wanted to make a, no, you can come, certainly. Yeah. Sorry, I just realised I'd gone past the other gentleman in his statement, so that's why.
Had a panic attack.
Yeah,
Just,
it's fixed now.
I'll just think my supper. Thank you. Just in regards to the community transportation service, I noticed for about 10 pages all the way through, my question is why is it shortened to SDS, Senior Disability Service, CHSP, Community Home Support Program, CTS, Community Transport Services, MAC, Buyers Care. Why, when you read this document, to me it's filtered clinically, and it's not important enough. I think all the way through, all the seniors and the community support and the community transport and my age care are important to be put forward. Because the elderly are reading this stuff, they're not going to understand it, in my opinion. I'm part of the elderly group.
So, Mr Busby, if I can just
I'm
answer.
asking the question, why it's all been shortened.
Okay, so I believe that when the term is first entered into the document, the full terminology is printed out, and then thereafter in the paragraph or later paragraphs, it's shortened to the abbreviation. That's my understanding of the process of producing these reports.
Okay. Next question is, in some cases it refers to council, and other places it refers to town. So when it refers to council, does that mean the councillors have made the decision to keep it or not keep something? And when it's the town, it's the staff that's made the opinion to do stuff, yes or no? So there's all the way through that same 10 pages. In some cases it refers to the council, in some places it refers to the town.
We'll take this on notice because we'll need to actually look at the context to ascertain whether the terms are interchangeable or not. So if you don't mind, we'll take that on context.
Excuse me. Financial suitability, does that mean to be sustainability? Or is it just is it suitability for the transport service or sustainability that's driving the opinions on whether it's retained or put aside?
What page is that on, sir?
11 of 80, private area 4, driving financial suitability.
Okay. Stop. How do I turn this off? Apologies, we have some time limits on some of these questions because clearly there are a lot of people in the room. Mr Busby, do you mind if we take these on notice because I will get the administration to respond to you on these questions.
Just have one more.
Very quickly.
Ensure operational activities reflect the strategic focus of council. Does that mean the ratepayers are residents or staff? 613.
On notice,
Thank
Mr
you.
Busby. Thank you. Yes, sir, you've got a question. Yes.
Hello, I'm April Ward, Parker Street, Bassendean. I just had a question in regards to the parking survey that was done around the area in relation to the pub and questioning all the residents. I just had a question as to why the times between 9, 12 and 5 were chosen for that survey when they measured the vehicles, and if that was in consideration as well of Saturdays and Sundays, because the busiest times for parking problems in the street are actually not those hours. At 9 in the morning, most people have left for work. At 12 o'clock, most people that have things to do if they are at home are out doing them. And at 5 o'clock, people haven't actually come home yet. So a lot of the problems occurring in the streets are not at those times. Also, was the whole of Parker Street measured in that survey? Because up the other end, there's less trouble than at the ends closest to the residential and the commercial areas.
If I could refer that to the officer, Mr Gibson.
Through Madam Mayor, the extent of the study area was south of Palmerston Street. That's shown on page 19. In terms of the spread of hours, it was simply chosen to get 3 inspections in per day across a 7-day period. So it wasn't intended to capture or not any particular event, but we tried to get out there 3 times per day, fitting in with other operational requirements, and those are the times that were chosen. So if there's any feedback that you've got to provide, that suggests there's parking issues outside those inspection times, happy to take it offline.
Yeah, I would suggest that probably between the afternoons of Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons, there's most problems, and particularly not the whole end of the street, but the street bearing down on the business side, where most of the residents are finding that they can't find a park. That's becoming the problematic part. So I think the survey perhaps didn't quite reflect the issue. That was my question.
Thank you, my dear. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So, sorry, was that a hand that went up and I just, no? Okay. So with that, we will move on to deputations. Now, we have a significant number of deputations, maximum of 10 minutes, and after each deputation, I will ask councillors if they wish to ask questions. It's only open to councillors to ask questions of someone who's doing a deputation. So the first person that we have for a deputation is Callum Thatcher.
Good evening, Mayor, elected members and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to present this evening at the briefing session. My name is Callum Thatcher and I'm from Element, and I'm representing Hawaiian Bassendean this evening. Element, on behalf of Hawaiian Bassendean, made a submission on the 16th of January 2023, strongly objecting to the proposed tavern and microbrewery located at 73 Old Perth Road. In summary, the objection primarily related to the lack of on-site car parking being provided. Whilst it is appreciated the proposed land use will bring further activity and vibrancy to the town centre, the proposed venue is not considered appropriate for this site, given that no car parking is being provided for patrons. We do not support the car parking variation and the venue being solely reliant on publicly available car parking bays to service the venue. Hawaiian Bassendean has significant concerns with the venue being wholly reliant on these bays, and furthermore, the impact this will have on their centre, which is located 150 metres east of the proposed site. It is understood the town have audited the immediate area bound by Guildford Road, West Road and Palmerston Street and have determined 558 publicly available bays. On face value, this is a significant amount of car parking bays. However, many of these car parking bays are located at a considerable distance from this venue, and this includes Wilson Street, Kathleen Street, Kenny Street, West Road, and portions of on-street bays on Old Perth Road. Obviously, it's human nature for patrons to park close as possible to their destination. The major concern from Hawaiian Bassendean is that patrons will use their private car park as opposed to publicly accessible bays, which are located at a significant distance from the venue. The accessibility of these bays and convenience for customers is a primary factor for businesses choosing to operate from a centre like Hawaiian Bassendean. This convenience should not be detrimentally impacted by land use for the sole reason it cannot provide its own bays to support its own patron demand. Whilst a portion of patrons are expected to use rideshare platforms and catch public transport, licensed venues still have a high degree of patrons arrive by private vehicles. Furthermore, given Bassendean is a district centre, population from outside localities will largely draw into the town centre, particularly during peak periods. We strongly oppose the justification for the shortfall that simply because this is a licensed venue, a high percentage of patrons will not drive. Supporting this car parking variation could also set an undesirable precedent for the Bassendean Town Centre. As the new town planning scheme comes into effect and the eventual precinct structure plan the town are progressing, higher density, more intensive redevelopment along this Old Perth Road corridor will become more frequent. As development occurs, this will continue to mount pressure on the availability of on-street car parking, particularly multiple venues seeking similar discretions with the same peak periods. If individual businesses have such a large reliance on on-street car parking, their accessibility and convenience for these bays will soon diminish. On-street car parking should not be used for the commercial gain of one site within the town centre, particularly where the commercial business is solely reliant on these bays to accommodate the venue. On-street car parking should only be used for overflow for the entire town centre and should not be used as a minimum to accommodate the required number of bays, particularly where it can impact surrounding landowners, such as Hawaiian Bassendean, who will be burdened with patrons for this venue parking on their site. As discussed, Hawaiian Bassendean strongly objects to this proposal and requests the proposal be refused on the grounds of insufficient car parking being provided. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Councillors, would anyone like to ask questions? Yes, that's Councillor Carter.
Oh, thank you very much for your deputation. Do you want to drink
Would you
water?
like to take a seat, sir?
Oh, sure, thank you.
My question is that one of your major objections will be that the Hawaiian car parking will be taken up by patrons attending this. So is that your main objection, or is it a general one?
Through Madam Mayor, that's correct, yeah. That's right.
Okay, so and you see this being an issue for current patrons of the Hawaiian Shopping Centre?
The main issue from Hawaiian's perspective is that basically the patrons, because it's obviously such a close proximity to the venue, that those car parking bays will be used by people who are trying to access this venue.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was perfectly clear.
No worries, thank you.
Councillor McWilliam?
I'm just wondering if there have been any previous experiences of Hawaiian where, you know,
Councillor McWilliam, would you be able to move your microphone a bit closer? Thank you. Sorry, they're new microphones. We're all getting used to them.
have there been any previous examples of where Hawaiian has found that other businesses in the town are using the car parking to a large extent, and what would be an example of that?
Yeah, I'm through, Madam Mayor. Not at this stage, not off the top of my head. They haven't, I suppose, had, to my knowledge, haven't had immediate issues with at the moment with the town centre being used, or people visiting the town centre for not shopping centre purposes using their bays. But it's something that I suppose the demand's probably never been high enough for that to be an issue. But I suppose from their perspective, it's a 300 patron venue. And obviously, towards the night time, it'll be their peaks, particularly on Saturdays. And given the proximity that the site has, there's a high probability that their bays will be used for that purpose.
Do you think Hawaiian might consider charging them for the privilege of opening the parking areas to such a business?
Through Madam Mayor, not at this stage. That hasn't been discussed. I suppose from our perspective, is that burden shouldn't really be placed on Hawaiian Bassendean for an individual site not being able to accommodate the required number of bays, because also that would have flow-on effects to their own customer base, their own businesses that are in that centre, particularly given that they're paying leases based on the fact that people come to that centre and they know they can provide a car park, they can get a car parking bay. That's part of why people will go to a shopping centre. So it has flow-on effects, and that's something that at this stage hasn't been discussed, but I wouldn't say that they're immediately supportive of doing that at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McLennan?
Thanks for your presentation. You just acknowledged that the peak hours for the microbrew would be evenings, particularly on the weekends, which seems to be would work quite well with Hawaiian's peak hours. I'm just wondering if you could give us an indication of when Hawaiian's car park is at its maximum usage.
Yeah, through Madam Mayor. Obviously, Hawaiian does have businesses currently that operate during later hours of the day. They have businesses that do food and beverage that do occupy at 9 o'clock, 9 p.m. So there will be some clash with some existing businesses on site currently. And it's also for future, Hawaiian, their centres are always evolving, and they take a lot of great pride in continuously evolving their centres. So they don't want this to be an impediment for future development later on. So that's, yeah.
No, I appreciate that. Do you have any data that Hawaiian could provide to give us some evidence around when your car park is at maximum usage and when there might be a surplus to requirements?
Through Madam Mayor, not on me currently, but I'm sure that they would have data around the car parking usage. Absolutely, yes.
That would be really helpful if they were able to provide that before the meeting next week.
No problem. Thank you.
So, Councillor Polifka?
Yes, thank you. What happens on football days?
Through Madam Mayor, I'm not off the top of my head. I wouldn't have that understanding at this stage. Yeah.
Okay, well I'll leave it at that.
I can take it on notice. That's fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Obviously you have Thursday night shopping with parking, and I'm assuming Saturdays and Sundays would also be relatively busy with parking. So following on from Councillor McLennan's requests for additional information, it would be very helpful for councillors to have that information. Is it possible for your organisation to potentially send that information through to the administration sooner rather than later? Because this item is for next week's decision making. So, thank you. Councillor Ames.
Just a quick one, and yeah, thanks for your deputation. Does Hawaiian have any data, and you can obviously take this on notice as well and maybe provide it with Councillor McLennan's information regarding the number of infringements that have happened within the car parking area based on either illegal parking or parking that has been done over the length of time? I believe I think there are 2 or 4 hour car parking sort of time constraints down there. I think that'll be good also information to have as to see how long our residents or other residents or people that are coming to the area are parking there, whether it's for shopping centre purposes only, or as Councillor Political was saying, is it other means of parking within Hawaiian space as well?
Sure, we can provide that information as well.
Councillor McLennan?
Yeah, sorry, one more question. I'm not sure whether you'd have the information available to you, but I imagine our planning staff would be able to answer if you're not able to this evening. I wasn't on council when the Hawaiian development was approved, but I seem to recall that when that development was approved, that it was granted a reduction in the car parking requirements. What's your understanding of the situation?
Yeah, obviously I'll have to look further into that. Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure obviously some level of reciprocity would exist within that centre between those land uses, because you obviously have across the centre there's extensive amount of bays, different peak times across different land uses. So I'm sure that would have been the case. But yeah, obviously I don't have the direct numbers on hand.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Okay. The next person I've got for a deputation is Angela Johnson. So Angela, normally we allocate 10 minutes. Again, if you'd like to take a seat, that would be excellent. So.
I've only got a short deputation because I read on your site it was 2 minutes. So.
That was for questions and statements.
Okay. All right. We are from 30 Hamilton Street, so we are directly across from the proposed microbrewery. And I'd like to point out that our submission was listed in the briefing documents as supporting this development, and we most certainly do not support this development. And that was clearly articulated in our lengthy submission.
Angela, can I just ask, would we be able to put the spare microphone? Oh no, it's too difficult. Sorry, it's just. Yeah. Might I suggest Councillor Ames and Councillor Carter, if you wanted to move up 1 seat each, you'll both have a microphone. So. Yeah.
All right, we already experience regular problems with access to and from Hamilton Street and also to and from our own property due to incorrect parking by members of the public. And this will increase again. It's been reasonably quiet recently because the Cork and Bottle has been closed, but as that reopens shortly, this will also increase our parking problems as the Cork and Bottle has no on-site parking. The shortfall of parking facilities for the microbrewery cannot be overlooked in our opinion. There are only 7 bays proposed on the site, and these are all for staff, which seems grossly inadequate given that there are potentially 300 patrons plus staff. As is obvious with the parking issues at the Bassendean Hotel, many patrons will not walk or catch public transport, therefore parking spaces are required for these patrons. We draw your attention to the town's own report on parking, recent report, where it clearly identified that there are negative issues with regard to street parking in Parker Street and Wilson Street. The report goes on to state that this is in part relates to the overflow parking from the hotel. We note that a significant concession was provided by the town of Bassendean regarding requirements for on-site parking bays at the hotel. And surely the council is not proposing to make the same mistake with the microbrewery tavern development proposal. To add to our parking concerns, the town of Bassendean Rangers are not available after 7 p.m. So who can we contact when we can't drive into our own driveway? It is our experience that town of Bassendean Rangers have either a reluctance or a lack of time to actually enforce current parking bylaws, and that's based on our experience in our street, and we fear that this will only get worse with the proposed development. Thank you.
Thank you. So, councillors' questions? Councillor McLennan?
Thank you for your time, Angela. So I hear that you're opposed to the development in its current form because of the parking. Is there something that you would be seeking from council to have as conditions of an approval, or are you just seeking it to be refused?
It would depend on what your conditions were. I struggle to see how the parking issue can be resolved if there are 300 people across the road, because the site cannot provide that amount of parking for even for 100 cars or 70 cars. So I don't know what conditions you could impose that would alleviate that situation. Obviously I have other concerns, but I've chosen to focus on parking.
So what I hear you saying is that you can't think of a way to mitigate the problems that you've identified, so you would be seeking it to be refused, is that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ames?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks for your deputation as well. It's sort of a bit of a follow-on question to Councillor McLennan's. You said you had some other concerns. This is the time to be able to voice those concerns. I know you haven't got them written down in front of you, but we've got to decide on this next week, and there's a hell of a lot of conditions that are working with. So take your time.
No,
but,
well, my husband will speak, our neighbours will speak, and we have tried to address an issue each.
I want to hear
to save from
you.
me? Right. I'm concerned that the developer has quoted that this will be a community-friendly establishment that will act as a desirable location and draw card for local residents. I get concerned in a green council that is very family orientated in our opinion and activity orientated, that all our activity in the main street, so much of it has to do with alcohol. I drink, please don't think I don't drink. But is that the only way we can attract people to Bassendean? I'm concerned about access to the site by food trucks coming to deliver food, by rideshare vehicles coming to drop people off. Where are they going to drop them off? I'm concerned about, this is very long and obviously you can read all of this, about the noise, the occupancy with the outdoor alfresco area, the noise impact on all of us as neighbours, residential neighbours to this. We have our bedroom at the front of our house. Am I going to be woken up when I'm trying to sleep because I have to go to work the next day? Am I going to have people urinating on my fence at midnight and chatting out the front while I'm trying to sleep, ready to go to work? We are concerned about noise, and that's noise not only from patrons and from possible music, but from people using bins. I noticed in your latest documents that there'd be an automatic closing gate on the bin, which is right at the back of the property. If that's slammed shut at midnight, I'm probably going to hit the roof when I'm woken up. So there's a lot of things, staff leaving at midnight, cleaning up out the back. How are they going to police people being inside at 10 o'clock at night? Because that's what the development proposal says, that people will have to be in by 10 o'clock at night. How are the staff going to make sure that happens? People have to leave to go to the ablution box at the back, so that requires them to go outside. We're also concerned about people going out onto the verge on Hamilton Street to smoke, because I'm assuming that there will be an open al fresco area at the front of the brewery, which means they won't smoke on Old Perth Road. They'll come around the corner, so there'll be people talking and chatting, and that could go on at all hours of the night. Concerned about rubbish and waste, but I'm sure that can be managed. But bins are a problem, especially for our neighbours. But the noise of the bins is a problem. We're concerned about if people come and take away beer purchases, that they're going to go down to the park. We've already last week saw a man urinating on the kids' swings in the park, so I don't want to encourage that any further. If people get takeaway and go down there at 8 o'clock at night, it's not a good look, I wouldn't have thought.
So, Councillor Ames, it answers.
I have a lot.
Absolutely, and as you've already mentioned, we do have a time frame and a few information to get through from other individuals on the same topic conversation. So, thanks very much. This is the forum for us as councillors to hear from our residents. So, I really appreciate that. One final question. You can take a notice if you like. What would you be absolutely hands in the air, fist pumping as a development in that area?
Well, it was a hardware store when we arrived, so any sort of retail would be great. I would even like a nice Italian restaurant there if I can manage that.
Okay. Councillor Polifka, ma'am, there's more questions. Sorry, Councillor Polifka.
Sorry. You mentioned before, and I imagine it was quite infuriating that you couldn't access your own property. So when it came to that illegal parking, a vehicle was parked in front of your crossover, is that the case?
Yeah.
Is there any measures that potentially could be taken to highlight that is your crossover and that vehicles can't park in front of it?
It's now marked after several years of contact with the council. It's now marked with lines and it says no stopping. But some people either can't see the lines or can't read or ignore both. So it is still a problem.
Right, okay, thank you.
Councillors, any further questions? Thank you very much. We'll now move on to Clayton Plug and Sev Grown. I'm sorry if I've mispronounced that. Apologies. And this is also item 9.3 as well.
Correct, yeah. All right, thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor, councillors and council staff. I thank you for the opportunity to present to you tonight. Obviously, it's in respect of the micro brewery and tavern, and we, my name's Clayton Plug from Harley Dykstra, who act as the applicant. I've got Sven with me tonight to just answer any questions of an operational manner, those sorts of things if you guys want to know anything. We were going to bring Mr. Brad Hill along, who's also from the proponent, but he's unable to attend tonight because his wife's recently had a baby, his partner. So he asked me to make some specific comments on his behalf. So I'll just start briefly with those. So Mr. Hill would like to thank the public for their many submissions in support of the proposed development and the council staff for their professionalism in dealing with this matter, including during their attendance at 2 of their other existing premises in order to understand the proposed use before council tonight. He'd also like to note that all comments, including those of concern and or opposition to this use, were fully considered during the various operational and design amendments that were made to the proposal following its advertisement to the public. He'd like to go on record noting that they wish for this facility to be fully integrated into the community as a venue that serves this community, whilst looking out for and ensuring the venue does not unduly impact on adjacent nearby residences. Their door is always open for discussion should issues arise, but the design of the premises has been carefully considered as much as they could to ensure that it complies with all relevant legislation so that local amenity will be preserved and even perhaps enhanced. So I'd also like to make a few brief comments, if that's okay, on the proposal before or up for discussion tonight. So firstly, I'd just like to highlight the positive impact that this particular use will have on the vibrancy and amenity of this key location in the heart of the town of Bassendean. It aligns, has been adequately pointed out in the council report, with the strategic policies and planning strategies that are in place for this area. And in particular, it does so by bringing that vibrancy of a venue that's currently dormant, derelict, as the council report puts it, and by really bringing it to life. And just to explain a little bit behind the proponents for this venue, I'd like to note that really this will be quite a unique dining experience for the patrons, and that's because our client, Lime Coast Brewing, are a beverage brewing company. They don't make their own food, and so their purpose is really to sell beverages on the site that are locally made. So as you'll have seen from the proposed plans, there's tanks and the like on the site where the completion of the brewing process occurs, and that'll be served directly to patrons at the venue. Secondly then, in order to obtain food at the venue, they are linking up with businesses in the area through QR codes and the like on the tables that will enable patrons to purchase food from adjacent or nearby venues. And so we see that really as a double activation for this particular area, because in the first instance, you've got a use that creates a vibrant atmosphere, foot traffic and the like. And in the second instance, you've got a use that benefits other businesses in the immediate surrounding area through the ordering of food from those venues. And it really should serve to create a vibrant heart within Bassendean. Now, obviously, the key considerations for the council relate to amenity, and we are keenly aware of that in respect of parking, as we've heard tonight, in respect of acoustics and other matters. That's something we're very much aware of, and so we have, right from the get-go with this application, knowing that those would be the issues, have sought to address them as best as we could. I'm sure you've all seen, or at least will see prior to next week's meeting, the parking study that's been completed by our traffic consultant, and there's been parking studies completed by the town recently, as you know as well, that look at availability of parking in this area. And there's there's more than 500 bays available within a walkable catchment of this particular site. Now, the parking shortfall varies depending on which document you read and look at. And I would just like to reiterate the comments through the town's report that really emphasise the fact that uses such as this are less car dependent than they were in the past, and that's why we see things like the state government wanting to provide guidance on non-residential uses and how much parking they should provide, and that's why you see much lower numbers these days in those kinds of documents than what we have in traditional town planning schemes. So you will have read in the report that if you were just to take those numbers, the shortfall for this particular venue would be somewhere between 6 and I think 25 bays. And that shows that really we're not dealing with as much of a potential parking issue as what might be considered when you think about the fact that there's over 500 bays available in the wider locality. Obviously, we've heard the comments from Hawaiian's representative tonight as well, and whilst I do note that the original parking study did refer to those bays because there would be some reciprocity. Can't say that word, but sorry, that one. The facts are that once we became aware of that, we took those numbers out of our parking study because it's clear that there is sufficient within the broader locality, and accordingly, we think there's easily more than sufficient in the area, and there is that reciprocity between the two uses that can occur as well. But we're not reliant on those bays, and so. I think that's an interesting point, and I think it's also worth noting, as one of the councillors noted, that the operating peak hours are very, very different. Yes, there may be some uses within the Hawaiian Centre that do operate at night, but I don't think the bulk do, and even if they do, say with late night trading and the like, their attendances at those venues are not going to be at their peak compared to what they would be during other hours, perhaps Saturday morning and the like. when retail is traditionally at its peak. So moving on from parking, I just want to talk about acoustics quickly as well. Hopefully I've got enough time to do so, but that's obviously been something we're keenly aware of, especially for the residents in Hamilton Street, because that's an obvious concern for them. And so we've designed with an acoustic consultant, an accredited acoustic consultant, an acoustic barrier around this that should ensure compliance. And our client is very much committed to making sure that this works for the residents as much as it does for them. And so that's why they're fully supportive of conditions on this, such as the noise modelling that's supposed to be taken 6 months after this is approved. That's a condition that we like because it gives a chance to demonstrate how this use is complying with the noise regulations. And so that in that respect, I'd suggest the acoustic study that's been undertaken has been done conservatively with that in mind. You know, that they do want to be good neighbours, and to emphasise, you know, that study's been done with a conservative frame of mind. So just finally, very quickly, these guys are experienced operators, as evidenced by the recent showcasing of their Long Neck Brewery, which is in East Perth, on the Destination WA TV show. So they operate numerous other facilities around Perth Metro. They're very keen to bring their unique experience to this locality, and they see this locality as a re-emerging as hospitality hotspot, given recent developments in this area, which they do applaud, and are keen to integrate themselves with the community in a very positive manner and with surrounding businesses as well. So we do thank the planning staff for their support. We do have, we are obviously offering broad support for the recommendation before you next week, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
So, councillors, Councillor Ames. Is your microphone on correctly?
I think it's
you
because I
pressed
did
the wrong
mine
number.
first.
Sorry? Sorry, I didn't realise. So, we'll go Councillor Carter first. Sorry.
Oh, now, I completely forgot what I was going to ask. I thank you for that very, very detailed response. I've got a question about why portable toilets are considered adequate for a 300-person venue, and why they, you know, because then portable permanent is an oxymoron, isn't it?
Yes, I guess so. But it's just as I understand it, Sven. I don't know if you can add anything to this, but essentially the number of toilets complies with the Health Act in terms of how many you need, and then in terms of the storage of waste and disposal of it, it's easiest to do in that fashion. I think in simplicity.
Yeah, so what I will add is the initial thinking around the planning for those was to use something that was prefabricated that met the minimum requirements for basins and sinks, etc. Since then, we've had our builders look at the site, and current plan is to build them from scratch on slab rather than use portable, if you like, transportable units. So should we be given the go-ahead, we will be stick building the amenities block.
Sorry, I don't understand what stick building means.
Building from the ground up.
So, in other words, a permanent structure,
Structure.
not portable ones stuck permanently.
Correct.
Okay.
Councillor McLennan.
Thank you for your information this evening. I had a couple of questions. The officers have recommended approval with a number of conditions, and I'm just wondering whether there are any conditions that we could expect you to challenge if it was approved as per the officer recommendation.
I don't believe so. No, I think we're comfortable with those.
Okay.
If I could just
yep.
add, that's okay. The only one that we may look at in the future, but this probably depends on how things develop acoustically, is the potential for music to occur in the rear, but that would only be subject to a separate application. It's not something we'd be challenging through the SAT.
Interesting, because that's the point I was going to ask you
Yeah.
for more detail on.
Yeah.
And you heard one of the community members specifically express some concerns about how that area would be policed with a 10 p.m. sort of curfew. Would you be able to give us some more clarification around how you would expect that to work?
Yeah.
Sure. So essentially, it would be in the same way that you would call last drinks at any sort of location where you would have staff members or security personnel walk around, advise everyone that curfew is coming in, that they are welcome to come inside or they may leave. So it's that's essentially how we're looking to handle that.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask a couple more questions, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
It would have been helpful if we'd been able to hear from you after all the other people's concerns so we could ask you those questions directly. But you've heard that parking is concerning for people, and understandably so. It's their home and they want to make sure that their lifestyle isn't too impacted by the business proposal. And I've heard you say that you'd work with the community, you want it to succeed. Can you outline to us how, if there were problems arising from parking, how you would propose to manage that and to try and improve the situation?
Well, I'd probably stand by my comment that I don't think there is going to be a parking issue because of the significant abundance. However, if there were specific issues within Hamilton Street, for example, I don't suppose that it wouldn't be impossible for those residents to speak to people within the venue to sort that out if it is indeed one of the patrons that are in attendance. I think that's fair, yeah.
So one last question, if you don't mind. You mentioned some other developments that your company's been involved with, the brewery and so on. Have you developed any others on this same model where there's not food available on site other than food trucks? And if so, how has that worked in the other locations?
So in the other locations we don't have that model operating right now. At the tap room at our brewery in Malaga, we operate on that model, but that is yet to be opened. But that's in the same way patrons can come and order from the local businesses, and it's not just food trucks. It's the app.
Sorry, other local businesses. My apologies.
It's the app that has been like a dedicated app that's partnered with local suppliers. Then we're allowing third-party apps like Menulog or Uber Eats that would come to a central location at the bar. The patrons would then come to the collection point. We'd verify their order. They take their order away. So we're not going to have drivers wandering around, etc. Everything gets delivered to a central place. Pardon me. And the food trucks are there as and when we can get them, because we can't be guaranteed food trucks every day, all the time. So it's the three-tiered sort of thing. But direct answer to your question, no, we don't have any evidence of that working in our current venues.
Yet.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Carter, would you like to turn off your microphone?
No, I had another question to
Okay.
ask. Do you,
Yes, I think Councillor Ames also had a question. That's yes, go for it.
very quickly, we're also on that issue of the food trucks. They would be coming and going all night, or will there be, say, between these hours they will all come, or how would you regulate that? Because I'm assuming that'll be just, certainly at peak times, I imagine between 5:30 and 9, they'll be there all the time.
So we have two specific allocated bays inside the property specifically for food trucks. And when they're booked in for the day, they will turn up for the business of that day.
Sorry, my apologies. I meant the deliveries, the Menulog or Uber Eats or any of those ones. Those people would be coming and going frequently,
right?
And they would be probably in a vehicle.
Correct. And I think if you look at the plan, there is, I believe, like a delivery bay adjacent to the front door. So they can park off the street, drop the food on, and park, and then leave.
Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for coming in, boys. Got a couple of questions in regards to your noise contour plots. At what height are they taken?
In respect of the buildings?
No, so you've got some contour noise plots here for front, door closing, so on and so forth. At what particular height are they taken?
I have to take the question on notice because it's an acoustic consultant's remit to answer that. I do know from memory in respect to the adjacent houses and the like, they look at window locations and things like that to work
Sure.
out
Yeah.
how that's going to impact.
Yeah, that was a big
Yeah.
question, and I'd love to be
Yeah.
able to find out at what particular height. We've got a couple of residents
Sure.
that have
Yeah.
quite high windows.
If I can say, if it's not in the acoustic report, I'll get something to you.
That would be great. We've only got some. The rest of my questions, I couldn't find it. So
Yeah, no,
that's all
that's
good.
fine. Yeah.
Thank you very much. But they're obviously good, and we've obviously heard them, no pun intended, from the Bassendean Hotel as well. Second question is just in regards to the layout of your ablutions, which obviously back onto the residents of 29 Hamilton Street. Is there any other locations that those ablutions may be more appropriately positioned, or can be more appropriately positioned? Because you've got the la-di-da offices inside that, obviously inside the area. Can those offices be relocated to the other side where officers can just be picked up and put anywhere? I don't know, just in regards to the structure and the thought process in regards to getting this across the line.
I don't know if you've got anything to say on that, Sven. I think it would have to be, again, a question I'd have to take a notice to look at how that would impact the design. And even acoustically, it sounds funny, but it may not be better. So it's something we'd have to consider. The venue does have that acoustic wall around the sides, inclusive of the toilets, to ensure that.
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, but there's no roof on those acoustics from what I can see on the plans. They're open air.
On the toilets, you mean?
As well as the alfresco area.
That's right, yeah, but the acoustic wall shields the noise accordingly. That's how their methodology works. I'm happy to get a further detailed explanation from the consultant.
I think that'll be super. Solely for the residents in and around the area. I think it'll be very important for them to understand.
That's fine. They'll be able to explain that. But essentially, a wall does just as good of a job, given the height of the wall. They were quite specific about its height to shield the noise from adjacent developments. It has quite a role, given the way the noise travels through the air. Yep.
I will add, we've also added the carport over the car parking area, the roof of which and the back end of which that faces the neighbouring property will be built of the same sound shielding material, so that should contain any noise coming up or spilling over from the carport, from the car park.
Okay, so can I just quickly ask about, you said the roof would be made of the same material, but I thought the material had to be very thick. Maybe I've misread that.
Dense.
Correct.
Is the word, yeah.
So when I talk about the roofs, I'm talking about the roof of the carport.
Yes.
And you can use something like a sandwich material, which is, if you think of a cool room, which is basically polystyrene sandwiched between two.
I'm familiar with the material, yes.
It's density that, as opposed to...
Okay. I do have a couple of questions as well. I note that delivery of supplies is supposed, in the report, it's outside the operating hours of the brew pub. And I'm wondering how that will affect the street and neighbouring properties with deliveries coming in, obviously prior to 8 a.m. in the morning and after hours, and also from a noise point of view, how that might work. Do you have any perspective on that?
I believe, again, the acoustic report does consider that. I'm pretty sure that was a question from the town of Bassendean at the time, their officers. And it's something that we discussed with them. Again, happy to provide further clarity around that, but I believe it does.
So the reason I raise that is because we've had other applications where, for instance, it's been a condition of approval that deliveries must be done within certain timelines, and I'm wondering if you're would entertain timelines in respect to deliveries for supplies.
I think we would.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll allow Councillor McWilliam, I think you had a question as well.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Just harking back to Councillor Carter's question about the delivery and the flow of deliveries. We have Guildford Hotel just across the bridge. They have a restaurant there. They have the hotel, of course, and the restaurant is also a pizzeria. And so people order and then they all go in to pick that up and come away again. So it creates a massive overcrowding of their own car park. The overflow goes into, the railway car park across the road and all of the adjoining streets, especially when there's a big crowd. But it actually takes over the entire street. We already have a fairly popular pizza place across the road, which a lot of Uber drivers will go to pick up food that they're going to deliver. And I think that your idea of having a bay out the front is overly ambitious. It won't be enough for the people coming with food to deliver to your facility.
So there's a question there, Councillor McWilliam.
Have you thought about the fact that there are other eateries nearby that are actually operating with, working with Uber Eats, etc., and any other number of food delivery services, and how you might manage that?
I can't say we've thought specifically in great detail about it. I appreciate the sentiment. I think there's two things. Firstly, a lot of the food, and it's hard to say until this obviously gets going, a lot of the food is intended to come from adjacent and surrounding businesses, as opposed to Uber Eats. But given the proliferation of parking in the area, I would have thought there are going to be bays available. I think that's the key point.
Sorry, I beg to differ. I think that you probably need to take it away on notice and actually do a bit of homework. Thank you.
Councillor McWilliam, we're not going to debate with somebody who's...
Stating a fact.
Okay, councillors. Okay. I would like to ask one more. Oh, Councillor Plifka, you can go first. Sorry.
Thank you. The previous deponent expressed some concerns about an increase in antisocial behaviour. Did you want to address that point?
I think that Sven, you could speak to this, but the liquor licensing process is quite stringent in terms of alcohol management, and particularly of antisocial behaviour and those sort of things. It's also a policing matter at the end of the day, but responsible service of alcohol and all those things are very rigid processes that they're going to have to stick to, which I believe should assist in ensuring that those kind of things don't happen, or at least managed appropriately.
No, thank you. Just wanted to make sure that was addressed.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is that this is a craft brewery. It's not a tab pub, and I guess what we're looking to offer premium beverages to a usually more mature demographic, and so we found that in operating our other venues, we rarely see any instances of antisocial behaviour, because we're not there offering the cheapest beer in the street and encouraging bus loads of end of footy trip or something like that. That's not what we're about.
Okay, councillors, if you don't mind, I have a question. Then I believe Councillor Ames. Then I think we should draw a line underneath the questions. So, my question is that the property owner does own other property in very close proximity to that area, that particular site. And I am wondering whether there has been any consideration to offset parking at one of those other properties that's very close to that location. Has that been considered by the proponents?
Do you have the answer to that one? I don't know.
Okay, would they consider that as an option?
Yeah, we'd have to ask them.
Okay, okay.
But again, I do believe there is sufficient parking in the broader walkable catchment for this site. So,
okay, Councillor Ames.
Final question. Obviously, you guys are, or your clients are brewers, which is great. We love a beer. I do anyway. Is there a full bar that's going to be open to the public that attend? Beer, wine, spirits, the whole works and jerks, or is it just solely, I suppose, focused on the amber ale?
It'll be focused on products that we produce. So we produce produce beer, we produce cider, we produce seltzers, we produce a range of spirits. We do not produce wine, but we do intend to have a very limited wine offering because we don't make it. But everything apart from the wine that we intend to serve is stuff that we produce.
Okay, councillors, I think we're going to move on from this particular topic. So, gentlemen, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
And yes, there were a lot of questions, so thank you for being so patient.
Appreciate it.
The next person I've got for deputation is Malcolm Sheehan. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. I'm at 30 Hamilton Street as well. That's my wife. And I just wanted to add a point about the way in which the brewery is designed, how it looks to us. It's clear from the physical design of the proposed microbrewery and tavern that patron entry and exit will generally be encouraged via Hamilton Street and not Old Perth Road. A large opening in the so-called acoustic wall on the west elevation is indicated at 7.2 metres and is unrestricted at all times, because there's nothing on the drawings to indicate that it can be closed off. Naturally, patrons will use this as an easy egress point, especially to access the verge areas of Hamilton Street. This will be for a variety of reasons, including smoking, taking up food deliveries, general loitering, ablution overflow, probably down at the park, but maybe on the verge, and of course generally arriving and leaving the premises. We have first-hand experience of the park being used for ablution overflow. Given that Hamilton Street is residential, because of the proportions of houses and lots that are dedicated to residential properties within that section of the street, and that Old Perth Road is the main commercial thoroughfare, if this proposal is to be approved, surely this opening, the 7.2 metre opening on the west elevation, should be restricted by way of gates or doors, etc., to ensure that the main entry and exit point for patrons is via Old Perth Road. If access to Hamilton Street verges is not controlled, the impact on residents by way of noisy and antisocial behaviour will be substantial. It's reasonably significant at the moment based on fast food outlets and a liquor store. 300 patrons consuming fine beer, I'm sure, can only add to this problem. This could occur as late as midnight on a Friday and Saturday, and up to 10 p.m. on weeknights, significantly affecting the residents' amenity. In addition, the development proposal does not specify how the closure of the rear al fresco area at 10 p.m, which is a new incarnation, each night is to be managed. Some comment was made of it just a sec ago, but I'm not sure if that will be terribly effective, where people at 10 o'clock consuming alcohol could be encouraged to leave without a decent amount of security on the site. And of course, the fact that this does need to be managed at 10 o'clock is probably another good reason why some sort of gate or doors should be installed on that 7.2 metre opening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, questions? Councillor Ames?
Also just a comment, Madam Mayor, but yeah, the comment regarding that quite large expanse of in and out is something that needs to be looked at, so thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, look, it occupies some 40% of that elevation, and the other aspect I didn't put down would be there's a loading bay indicated on the drawings on the left-hand side of the opening, and I don't know how safe that would be for people who are using the venue. Also, without a doubt, food delivery drivers will alight the building via that crossover. Again, people coming and going through that may present a safety hazard.
Just to clarify, I believe the loading bay on the left is for the garbage trucks, if I'm correct in looking at that, through that entry.
I guess my point, Madam Mayor, is that it's a bay that will be left open, and hence delivery drivers of off-site food could easily take advantage of that. You won't control them on Old Perth Road, mainly because they'll be banked up down the road at peak times of food consumption, I would expect.
I take your point. Okay, councillors. Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So we've got Heather and John. Thank you. So
Thank you so much.
you're doing separate deputations, are you?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
My name is Heather Ursig. I live at 29 Hamilton Street, and we purchased our home over 20 years ago, and we've raised our family here, and we absolutely love our community. This is a photo of our home as viewed from the proposed tavern. All 4 of our bedrooms are on the wall that directly adjoin the border of the proposed development. The windows on the top floor are where my husband and I sleep. This is only a few meters from the venue. Whilst we acknowledge that the town centre development is going to occur, we do think that there's a number of reasonable measures that have not been addressed in the proposal as it stands, to try to minimise the impact on our own personal amenity. We do support the revitalisation of the town of Bassendean, and we want to ensure that it creates a lasting and quality legacy in its developments. We are aware that we are an interface property to the town centre, and we're located next door to a commercial neighbour. I can't stress enough the importance about having good neighbours. Council also needs to understand that embedded in the design of this development, you need to be mitigating the risk of conflict between neighbours. The development also has to acknowledge that their proposal is an interface property directly bordering residential properties, and this needs to be developed accordingly. We have previously sought approval, and Council was very supportive in our extensive personal investment in renovating and upgrading our home. There was no indication from Council that it was inappropriate or not in line with the direction of the area. The level of investment that we've made will not change regardless of whether we're rezoned from R20 to R60, and it's preemptive to suggest this before the consultation process has concluded. The development's largest hurdles can be mitigated. The parking. The property currently has a huge car park. It seems crazy that this would be given up. Why would a venue that has on-site parking give this up when parking is its biggest problem? Use the existing car park. The toilets. The proposed portable ablution block is not fit for purpose and needs to be incorporated inside the current structure. A portable ablution block brings with it a huge list of risks: excessive smell, noise from the patrons using it until midnight, because the ones that are inside still have to come outside to use it, smokers and vapes. It's not being closed off from the street, and may I reiterate again how close this is to my bed. It's closer than my ensuite. I have extensive scent allergies. I have anaphylaxis. I carry an EpiPen. This will directly affect my health and well-being. If you cover the parking area to further reduce the noise, that would mitigate a lot of the problems. The delivery driver bays out the front, a proper entrance to the venue, being on Old Perth Road, not Hamilton Street. Hamilton Street is predominantly residential. The town centre is along Old Perth Road. Again, I had said before, there's no evidence to see where the drivers will be delivering this, but we have covered this now. If these issues are not resolved prior to the approval, there will be a huge burden on Council to manage these issues, noise complaints and expenditures. There has not been effective measures put forward other than a proposed management plan. I work in regulation. I understand management plans. The issues of approving a development that does not fit in the practice will become a burden of compliance. Management plans should be the last option when you have exhausted the opportunities to put good design in place. The old saying, it's easier to ask forgiveness than it is to get permission, comes straight to my mind. With the objective of vibrancy and improvements of the town centre, you need to take every opportunity to ensure that they're good developments. If there are changes that we can minimise the offset impacts to surrounding neighbours such as us, why would you not do that? Good design that considers and mitigates issues from the onset. We acknowledge that there are mutual obligations to being an interface property for us to accept, but we also, the owners of the development, need to accept this as well. And as a result of that, there is an obligation on council to ensure that a good quality design that leaves the right footprint and achieves positive outcomes for Bassendean. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, questions? Councillor Ames.
Thanks for coming in and having a chat. Hotly debated topic of conversation this evening. What would your thought process be if that alfresco area of 550 metres was removed, and all the other bits and pieces that you had said within your deputation, if they were to be sort of well looked at and covered off by the developer?
Yeah.
Would that be a pretty positive way moving forward, and you would more than likely either change or think a little bit more positively in regards to the development at hand?
Well, previously when the cork and bottle was being developed, we had serious concerns with the beer garden they were going to put out the back there. We worked with the town of Bassendean and the developer, and they made that into a function room. They didn't have the bins emptied at the times, and it's never been a problem. We had once where the bins were emptied at 4:30 in the morning, which, you know, when all of those bottles go out in those huge massive bins and cans, you hit the ceiling. My windows, as I pointed out, the noise, the acoustic wall that they're proposing is at the floor level of my windows. My windows, you can't mitigate noise that goes up. If it's covered, if the area was covered, that would be fantastic. And I think it would be a great venue too, you know? Or put the parking. There's so many options.
And just following on your conversation with the town and the now Birdie, which is soon to be open, which is obviously great. No dramas with them whatsoever. Patrons, end of night. Would you be able to count them on one hand or no hands, or sort of what's your experience
I mean, it's
been?
been about 8 years with them. Yes, there's been a few issues, but nothing significant, not ongoing, and not happening under my bedroom window. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's it.
There are no more questions, councillors? Okay. What I would ask is thank you, for people, there's still a few people to provide deputations. I'd ask that perhaps we don't duplicate what's already been discussed. If you just want to say, I object to noise or what have you, without going into a huge long things, because we are seriously running behind time now. So, Mr. John, I know that your wife has done a presentation, so if I could ask if you could just keep it to any items that are different, that would be excellent.
Yes, thanks very much, Madam Mayor, councillors, CEO and the town staff. Thanks for the opportunity. Look, Heather's done a fantastic job, so I won't repeat too much of it. I think one of the key points is that we are the most affected local resident. We're immediately adjacent to the proposed development, so we're quite sensitive to the impacts on us. I think, notwithstanding the fact that there has been some consideration given, I still get a sense that there hasn't been a really comprehensive enough consideration of the impacts on us, and I got that impression also from the way that the report was structured. It just felt that there wasn't really an appropriate level of sensitivity and in fact perhaps some dismissiveness of the sort of concerns. It's encouraging to hear some of the information that's been mentioned by the proponent. certainly wishing, full integration into the community, but when I hear statements about the design is considered to address the legal requirements, it sort of indicates to me it's looking to meet the requirements but not really fully embracing how does it integrate with the community and how do we actually perhaps go a bit beyond what the basic requirements are. And I guess one of the key points, Heather did touch on this, but relying on management plans. I understand that management plans are necessary to operate various premises, but the management plans shouldn't be the primary basis to address some of these issues. I've got an engineering background, and in my experience, it's better to design out the issues when you can right at the start. You build out the problems rather than relying on management plans and compliance efforts that then take a lot of resource, a lot of effort, can create a lot of angst. And so that's a bit of a philosophy that I think goes to perhaps some of the potential solutions. We've already heard some of those things. We've certainly got a major concern with noise. That's one of our primary concerns. Appreciate that there's been an acoustic study, and I'm not disputing that the materials that are being proposed and so on are appropriate, but just to reiterate the point that the 3.8 high noise wall, our development had quite very high ceilings. It's got floor space. Our windows are over 2 metres above that. Now I know that the performance of acoustic walls and so on I've got some familiarity with. Particularly in the evenings when the air is dense, the travel of that sound over those walls will affect our amenity and our sleep. Look, we're really open to working with the proponent. I guess we are against the proposal in its current form, but as has been alluded to, there are some benefits that can be brought from it, but there are still some concerns around managing the antisocial behaviour and some of those other elements. The point about the frontage, the main point of activity should be on facing Old Perth Road, rather. If that can be mitigated, the impact on Hamilton Street, then that may be an improvement. The cork and bottle experience was fantastic. A really proactive proponent. The town staff at the time were really helpful to work with, and we were able to work through a solution. Converting what was proposed to be an open area to an enclosed area really solved a lot of problems. It is a little bit further along Old Perth Road, so the main frontage and access is onto Old Perth Road rather to the back. But that's the type of example. One of my first questions you alluded to earlier is why couldn't a similar design amendment be considered for the tavern? That would address some of those problems. One of the other considerations is, there's a lot of sensitivity in the report about not pushing back on the proposal around capacity. There's some conflicting information in the report. On the one hand, in considering the parking requirements, it's sort of referencing that the venue's unlikely or it's not always going to be operating at capacity. Seems to imply we can discount the parking requirements. And then on the other hand, around the area of risks, recommendations to council is that if you muck around with the capacity, that it'll kill off the proposal. I dispute that. I think there are opportunities to look at the capacity, and I understand there's commercial considerations about the viability of the business, but I don't see that in itself should be pushed at the expense of not really addressing the parking shortfall or the other issues. There's been a lot said about the parking. There's a lot said about supporting the proposal, this type of activity and use being less reliant on cars. I think we all want to achieve more of a modal shift away from cars to e-mobility, ride-share, public transport. But I know that public transport patronage is still only about 10% in terms of commuters. It's a hard slog to shift that. And I would really ask, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence to say that this is not going to be still a car-based activity? The concessions, there was another point in the report about the concessions that were made to support the Bassendean Hotel redevelopment. talked about a 51-bay concession that was made using the local parking policy 8. And I know that there's about 80 bays that actually were incorporated into that site. So in effect, there was a 39% concession that was given to the Bassendean Hotel. With this proposal, it's using the same guidelines. It's 80 bays that are required. The proponent is providing no bays for patrons, 7 bays for staff. It's actually a 91% concession that's been provided to this proponent in terms of relaxing that parking requirement. So it's more than double the concession that was given to the Bassendean Hotel, and that's a $7 million redevelopment of a heritage listed or heritage building. That's very iconic in Bassendean. So I really question where's the equity in that, and where's the logic in that. There's other. The toilets have been addressed to some extent, and it was pleasing to hear that moving away from portable to a built toilet is the right move. But the location for us is still a problem because it's all good and well to say that the area at the back will be cleared at 10 o'clock, but there's still patrons that are there until midnight, and then you need to try and get them out the door as well after they bought their last drinks at a minute to 12. So I think there are options to actually look at relocating the location of that. I mean, why can't the existing building be extended to incorporate a toilet facility inside that's away from, the adjoining residential areas?
I'm going to ask you to start winding up now, sir, if you don't mind.
I'll wind up. So look, I think. Suffice to say that I think there are built-in design options, and it's far more preferable to do that than to try and deal with all the fallout and the grief of trying to manage the problem after it's in operation. It's a little bit, I suppose, disappointing just to hear that the antisocial behaviour and so on is a liquor licensing police issue. It's not our problem, but it is our problem. So we're concerned about that. I think if I had to wrap up, I'd just say that we're not against development. We've supported it with a cork and bottle. If it's the right development with a good quality design that's going to achieve good outcomes and not negatively impact or be adverse to the local community and the local residents in the area, then we're all for it. But I think there needs to be some consideration of the design of this and to make it more appropriate.
Thank you, sir. I will tell everybody that councillors have received email copies of all the deputations, so councillors do have all of these copies, which they will read during the week a second or third time, if they so choose. Councillor Ames.
Quick question, Madam Mayor, and thank you, John, for coming in for a discussion. You said you had some pretty solid discussions with the development of the cork and bottle. To what extent have you and Heather been engaged with either with the town or with the developers for this particular development, which is obviously closer to your residents?
Well, it's the disappointing thing. We've had no contact from the developer and very limited contact from the town.
Thank you. Councillor Plivka?
Great, thank you. So I want to hear from you as the adjacent neighbour, so not talking about parking stresses in the general area. So you have spoken about the toilets, so your position on that, that in the vicinity of your boundary, you'd like the toilets integrated into the main building. I think that's the position you put forward.
Yes, I do. I think that's...
So I've already heard that. In relation to the car parking bays, do you have any suggestions for that area or any concerns relating to noise?
Sorry, you mean in general or the 7 that are proposed?
The 7 that are on the site.
Look, I mean, there is parking along our fence that occurs now. The out and about buses park there, and it's interesting. There's usually only 1 or 2 drivers there, but in the morning when Claude's sort of getting the bus ready and so on, there's a lot of noise that sort of comes up now. So I do appreciate that the proponents have indicated a covering for the carport and using acoustic material, and perhaps going further down adjoining our property. So I think on balance, you know, those 7 bays there with those types of considerations should work okay. It's
well, yeah, that was really. I'll give everyone else a chance, but yeah, great. Thanks for that.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, and was any councillors? No. Okay, so thank you, sir. I had 2 deputations from Natalie Fisher and Dawn McKinnon that were sent. They're not here. We're not going to read them out tonight. But I have also Kelly and Benjamin Steele. Okay. And Kelly, if you could do me a great favour and
be super quick.
Yes.
I can. Just quickly, my husband and I have just purchased 32 Hamilton Street, so we're probably your newest residents. We have lived there 5 years though, thank you. But my family has owned the house for 30 years, so it's the big old yellow place, 120 metres away from this venue. Obviously, you've heard from my neighbours, there's a number of issues that they've highlighted, which I also agree with. Some of my biggest issues are that I have children, young children, that access the park quite often. It was great that Bassendean Council have upgraded that park. It's extremely busy all the way into late afternoon, especially in the summertime. And already at the moment, we've had quite a number of near misses from people driving up and down that street, from the children coming between the parked cars. I believe with the new venue going at the end of the road, with more stress on parking on Hamilton Street and the main entrance to the venue being on Hamilton Street, that will only cause further issues and potential danger to children coming in and out of that park area. A lot of Heather and John, they come directly across their driveway all the time, and as I said, we've had a couple of near misses. I'd just like to stress again, I design hospitality venues for a living and have for 7 years, so I'm very familiar with hospitality venues, and my husband actually sells beer as well. So again, we're very much for something in that site. We're for a microbrewery, we're for a hospitality asset, but done in the right way. And I think with this venue having its major in and out on Hamilton Street, that's not appropriate for it being a residential, family-friendly street. Having the toilets outdoors to access in the middle of, like during the evening, again, not acceptable. Also, I'd like to stress that there are a number of venues I've recently worked on, especially for you in New South Wales, which I'll be more than happy to send the details for retractable coverings over beer gardens. They can be opened, closed, and they can be put into different louver settings, and they will enclose more of that noise, which is a lot better option than just a management plan. I've worked in enough venues and I've done enough venue management plans as a venue manager to know they don't always get adhered to. So, and I don't think that should be to the stress of the residents around. Sorry. And then one other thing was, has the new Aegis development been taken into account when we talk about parking? You've got 64 more beds coming in there. Then you've got a number of new residents going in there as well. I spoke with Aegis today because we do a lot of their fit outs. They weren't very impressed actually by what's going to be proposed across the road for them, because those 64 people will have family that need somewhere to park. So if we've already got a shortfall, where are they parking when they want to come see their loved ones? So anyway, that's all I had to say. Thanks.
Councillors,
unless you've got questions.
Councillor Ames.
I've got kids at home.
Another
They're
question.
messaging me like,
Really-
where are you?
really quick.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming in and having a chat. And I'm not knocking what you do in regards to your profession,
Yeah.
but I'd love to know, like, professionally, what is your role? Do you have any qualifications? What's your experience? Because you said you've dealt with a lot of this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So just having that, I suppose, background about who you are and what you do would provide a little bit more of an understanding about sort of the scale of which you've worked at in these types of environments.
So I have been doing this for 7 years, and I've got a qualification, an international qualification to design venues. Done training with Liquor Licensing, Health Council. So yes, it's a qualification that I've had for 7 years. The largest venue I've designed is Gage Road's A Shed, which is a 1,500 pack venue. I've also done Lakelands Tavern most recently, which is a 400 pack venue. I've also worked with venues that are close to residential areas, never quite this close though. So
That's my background, so yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you. Councillors, no other questions? Okay.
I know the kids.
So, one last deputation on this particular item from Louise Thompson.
No, that's not about this item.
Oh, sorry, Louise, it's 9.5. I apologise. Would you like to? Apologies, Louise.
No, not at all. Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name's Louise Thompson. I'm the strata manager at 63 3rd Avenue, Bassendean. So I'm here to speak about S31 reconsideration, the use not listed short stay accommodation. So firstly, I'd just like to address some of the community feedback that I've been made aware of. The concerns over parking congestion. There's 11 car parks within the complex with 2 additional visitors bays. Typically, our guests have one a car, if not none at all. So the complex has vacant bays available at any given time. It's just not an issue. There's always parking there. The potential for noise. Management uses noise monitoring technology which alerts us to the continuous noise. So we can quickly intervene if necessary, if anything escalates. Short stay guests don't fall under the Residential Tenancy Act, therefore management have the power to remove guests immediately from the premises. The complex also has CCTV and on-site owner-occupier who will have contact management if the need arises. In regards to the planning location criteria for short stay accommodation, in retrospective, we haven't experienced any issues in the past 5 years. There's been no complaints to council. I'm not even sure that the locals were even aware that we were running a short-term accommodation, because some of them have made, comments about things that could happen that we've already been operating and they've never come up. There's a bus stop directly outside the complex, and there are buses that run every 15 minutes. So although it's not a high frequency bus line, because you do not have one in Bassendean, there are buses that go through there and they're right at the doorstep. It's also only a 13-minute walk from there to the town centre and to your train station. I'm actually the original developer of that site, so for me to even get a DA on that, I had to be within 800 metres of that train station. So we also have, within that complex, we have a push bike facility that we can give to our guests to ride bikes, to be able to get to these places. So the location really isn't an issue, and it is retrospective. We have been operating for 5 years. So the other thing is, it might be nice to just focus on some of the benefits that having short-term comes into. Everybody's talking about wanting to bring in a lot of development into Old Perth Road, into improving it, to having your tourisms, but yet you don't want to accommodate any of them. So, like if we've got some short-term accommodation, we don't have it in Bassendean at the moment, so this is an alternative for them. They also provide an economical benefit, as the guest's going to spend money and other visitor-related amenities, your restaurants, your bars, your museums. They're going to utilise all of those facilities, so we're bringing them in. Guests that we have currently, a lot of them are visitors. They're visiting families so that they can stay close by to families. We have people stay that their houses are getting their floors renovated, so they come to us so that they can stay nearby to their house. Their kids can still go to the local schools. We also have people that are coming down from the northwest.
I've had, in the last 2-3 months, I've had 2 expecting mums come. They were waiting to have their babies. They stayed for 6 weeks at a time, both of them. They were actually in apartments side by side, just while they were waiting for their babies. So we do have a different demographic of guests that come and stay at short-term accommodation. There's a lot of stigma around it with young ones coming in and having wild parties and things like that. That's not been the case. We've had it operating for 5 years. So I'd just like to say that the complex is also incredibly maintained. We have staff on site all the time. Our cleaners are there for changeovers. We know when there's a maintenance issue, so the buildings are always really well upkept. And once again, our neighbours didn't even know that we've been operating. That's really all I was going to say. I just was bringing myself out here so that everybody can have a go and ask the questions and do what they need to do. But I'm pretty much looking forward to a favourable resolution for this one.
Thank you, Louise.
Yeah.
Councillors, questions? Councillor McLennan.
Thank you, and I know you've been waiting patiently to get to your item, so I appreciate your time this evening. Firstly, I just want to correct the record. You made the statement that we don't want to accommodate developments in the town, and I would completely disagree with that, and I think that's reflected in the draft Local Planning Scheme 11, which is currently before the WAPC, so just felt the need to make that point.
I wasn't meaning that you're...
No, that's okay, that's all right.
Yeah, no.
I'm just wondering, you acknowledge that this was a retrospective application that you've been operating for 5 years.
Yes.
And I acknowledge that there haven't been complaints. So I'm just wondering why you didn't seek approval at the outset rather than waiting.
I did, actually. So 5 years ago, I went and saw Kristen Buttle, and you had no policies around it. There was no planning whatsoever of what to do, what to have. So Kristen... There was no point in putting anything in because there was no guidelines. You had nothing. So that was why. So what was agreed is that when the town of Bassendean decided to put policies in place, that we would make application, which is exactly what we did. You brought them in last year and we did our submission.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Councillor McLennan, would you like to turn off your microphone? Councillor
Thank
Ames,
you.
are you...
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thanks for coming in. My only question is in regards to the intervening of noise complaints.
Yep.
Noise seems to be a pretty common topic of tonight. We like to be in a nice, cruisy town of Bassendean. You said you intervene. How does that happen? What's the turnaround time? And give us the process. If there's a alarm goes off from your distant technology, how does that process occur to mitigate that sound in the area?
So what we do is we have sensors that are on the ceiling. So when there is a noise level, we can set our power levels. So when the noise has been at up to 10 minutes at that same level above what we allow, we get notified. We have an alarm that goes off. So our first call of action is that we will call them and ask them to tell them that they're in breach, that they are being too loud and to cut their noise down. So if it reoccurs and it lasts any longer than that, we will give them another warning. But if it continues, then we will come and we will shut them down. If there is... The other thing that this particular detector does is it picks up the amount of phones and things that can be connected. So it gives us an indication if they're in breach of how many guests are allowed on the premises. So if that should happen, we can be there within 20 minutes, 30 minutes at the max, and have them out. I have had to personally remove people before, and as short term, because it's not governed by the Residential Act, you can ask them to leave and actually remove them, and they have to check out immediately, change the codings, and off they go. So it's just something that we've navigated the whole time that we've been in there. It's just not an issue, and it doesn't happen often. In fact, it hasn't happened for a long time. It was more so during COVID, at the very beginning of COVID, when you had a lot of people that were all frustrated and stuff. It was about back then, so it was a few years ago, was the last incident.
Councillor Plivka?
No, thank you. So you mentioned that you spoke to a planner at the town of Bassendean to discuss the prospect of operating it in this way. Did you speak to him prior to building the complex?
Not prior to building. The intention when I built was to sell, but with the market changing, I ended up having to change strategies. So as it was a development, I was going to charge the GST and stuff, so from that point of view I did turn it into a short stay venue for that reason.
So you made a commercial decision to transition to that from having initially formed an intention to sell each of the units?
Yes. So that was it, and now I've held 5 of those, so I'm the majority owner there, and I hold 5. And it's been the best decision I've made. It's great. I've had a lot of, I have other investments where I've had long-term residents. I've got a property in Inglewood, for example. It's a beautiful old heritage house that I had a tenant in that totally destroyed it. Cost over $100,000 in renovations, and it took me 6 months to get them out. So for me, I would not go back to long-term tenancy. I would only use short-term.
And in terms of the complex that's built in Bassendean, is that the only example you have of that operating model, or is that something you've duplicated elsewhere?
No, I haven't built. That was the last complex that I have done, so I haven't. But I do. We also have we're an agency, so we manage long-term and short-term properties throughout Perth. So these are not, this one here is not the only short-term accommodation that we manage. We do have variety around the different shires or counties.
All right, well, great. Thanks for giving me that insight.
No worries.
Councillors, any further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite the Deputy Mayor to preside over the next deputation from Tristan, and also the item which will be 9.4. If Tristan is here.
Tristan, you're welcome to come up to the table if you'd like.
Hello.
And you're speaking on item 9.4.
9.4, yeah. Hi, I'm Tristan. I'm the owner of 52 Broadway, Bassendean. I bought the house about a year ago now, in a totally destroyed state. It was previously a long-term rental. It was a drug house and party house for quite some years, and I've completely gutted it, and I've given it a new roof, new flooring, new everything, and I've just basically had the idea to make it an Airbnb when I bought it, and then it sort of, the ruling came in, so yeah, it seems I'm just 136 metres outside of the radius, but there is actually a bus stop that's around about 80 metres away. Again, not high frequency. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about some points. I know I got a lot of positive feedback, which I'm grateful for. There was only one sort of opposing statement. I just want to go through a few of those and just sort of give my opinion on them. So, just about the comment about the about long-term accommodation being a lot better for the property and for the community. I just think, just back to my statement about what the property was before, is that it was a drug and party house before, and that was long-term. And I just think short-term's a lot better in the way that I can actually control who stays there. I can, if any of that's going on, I can sort of move them on. Whereas long-term, you sort of don't have as many rights, sort of locked in long-term. So, and I've put a lot of effort into making the house, to bringing it back to what it once was, and you know, I wanted to maintain a beautiful old house in the community, so I want to look after that and make sure that there's no parties or anything like that, no damage done to the house. I actually live 1 minute around the corner on Prospector Loop. So I'll be there, keeping a close eye on it and managing it. And that's pretty much all I have to say.
Beautiful. Thanks for being here. And the home looks beautiful. You've done an amazing job, so congratulations.
Thanks.
Do any councillors have questions for Tristan? You're off the hook by the looks of things.
Good.
Thank you. And as you know, the decision will be made next week. So you're welcome to stay for the item because we're going to deal with it right now. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So councillors and everyone in attendance, we're going to go straight to item 9.4, which is the one that Tristan was just speaking to, his application for a short stay accommodation. And maybe you could just ask the officers to begin with to speak to this item.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor. The purpose of this report, as everyone's well aware, is to consider an application for short stay accommodation at 52 Broadway in Bassendean. As the report sets out, the proposal complies with the relevant local planning policy with the exception of the provision requiring the site to be located within a 400 metre walk from a town centre or railway station. As the gentleman just alluded to, the site is located 536 metres from the Bassendean railway station and 595 metres from the town centre. But for the reasons set out in the report, the minor variation notwithstanding, it's recommended the application be approved.
Thank you for that, Mr Gibson. Any questions for the officer, councillors? Councillor Ames?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor, and through you to Mr Gibson. Is the property owner aware of the points that have been listed within the report to move forward with?
The conditions, do you mean?
Yes.
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, probably a question for the applicant, but I would suggest so, given that he's here tonight.
So I guess what you're saying is there's been no concerns expressed by the applicant to your knowledge about the conditions that have been imposed?
Through you, Madam Deputy Mayor, no.
Yeah, thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Okay. Councillor Ames, would you mind going and getting Mayor Hamilton back, please?
Thank you, everyone. Okay, we'll now move on to item 9.1, Community Transport Service, and I will invite Mr Gibson to provide any additional information on this.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the purpose of this report is for Council to consider the petition that was presented on the 28th of March, and also the motions that were passed at the special electors meeting of the 18th of April. Councillors are very much across the issue, as the matter has been in front of Council a number of times in the past 6 months. The report before councillors tonight is substantially similar to those previous reports, but does include reference to the Council adopted strategic budget policy, as well as further detail on the financial considerations that Council is to have due regard to. Ultimately, it is recommended that Council not fund the re-establishment of the service.
Councillors, questions? Councillor McLennan.
Thank you. My first question is just seeking to understand the comments that are made in the report about other local governments providing a service, but only to people that are my aged care and home support package clients. I'm just not quite sure of the significance of those restrictions and why that's not something that we would also offer.
Mr White will answer that, or Mr Gibson? Mr White.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I can start and see how we go. So I guess the significance is that anybody who's eligible can register for My Aged Care. And you can go onto the My Aged Care website, select a provider, and obviously the town's divested its senior services to Amana Living. They're one of many providers who operate in the region. I only mention them because I know a bit more about their operations than some others. And select transport as an option. and if one selects transport as an option, then that is available to be used through that provider, normally for a fairly low user fee. And in the case of Amana Living, for example, I know that it's $6 per trip within a certain radius, and I think double that if it's not within a certain radius. I can't remember the radius exactly. It's something like maybe 15 kilometres. So one can register for My Aged Care, select a provider and receive the service by paying a small fee for use of the service. And the reason that a My Aged Care provider is able to provide the service perhaps for $6 a trip compared to some of the costs that the town the administration has outlined in the report to council tonight is because they receive Commonwealth funding and the town doesn't.
Councillor McLean, your microphone's not working properly.
So I understand, obviously the town divested from in-home services and our own packages previously. So am I right in thinking you're saying that they're only providing these, the other local governments are only providing these services because they haven't divested that, so they're still an official provider, and that's why they're not also offering the service more broadly to their community?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think that their conditions are that they provide it through under the CHSP program, either themselves or through a third-party operator. Yep.
Councillor Carter.
Oh, thank you. Can you tell me the Amana Living, who you recommend, they do only work for people who have got their care package?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not recommending Amana Living by any means.
No, but it's one
just
of the
merely mentioning that I know a bit more about their services because of the previous process that we went through at the town. So under Amana Living or under My Aged Care, there's two categories, I guess. There's the Commonwealth Home Support Program, CHSP. That's your entry level, and you can register for My Aged Care, be assessed as to what level of services and support that you might require. For example, somebody might need some transport or some domestic assistance with cleaning or some assistance with meals, those sorts of things. And if they're assessed, they receive Commonwealth support for those services. They liaise with their provider and arrange the services through the provider. If their needs change, they can get elevated through the assessment levels. It's 1 to 4 for the Commonwealth Home Support Program, and then if that is not sufficient to satisfy their needs at some point in time, they can move to a home care package, which is a different program with higher level support.
Thank you. That's a bit of my point. People who access or wish to have a transport have to actually belong to one of these programs. Unlike our previous clients, they didn't have to be part of this whole assessment process. So surely if people have to give up their licence or don't have a licence, but not on these programs, then they fall through these particular cracks, don't they? The other thing I wanted to bring up...
So, Councillor Carter, sorry, was there a question in there?
Yes, well, that's my question. Yeah. They're going to have to be part of this whole package of care packages.
So, Councillor Carter, I think Mr. White wants to actually answer something there, but...
Well, I was merely going to mention that the facility is provided by the Commonwealth Government under the Commonwealth Home Support Program.
Yes.
So it's a question for council, really, whether it's a role for local government.
Yes, I do understand because that's been said, but I think we probably are talking at cross purposes here. My other question was about the taxi vouchers. We know that taxis do not come to short distances in Bassendean because I've stood up so many times myself. So they won't come and pick people up to take them shopping. Amana Living don't take people shopping either, do they, under that care package?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, they have a shopper service.
They have a shopper
service. I think it's $3 a trip.
Okay. And they will pick people up in Bassendean and drop them at the local shopping centre and pick them back up again?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
I have Councillor McLennan next, or Councillor Polifka next, then Councillor McLennan, then Councillor McWilliam.
I've already spoken, so I'll let Councillor Polifka go.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Just turning to page 12 of the agenda, we've got a whole raft of figures there. I see that the operating cost for the vehicles alone is 20,000. For two of them, yes. I think one's owned, one's hired, but 20,000 a year will provide access to these two vehicles, and that we have been somewhat concerned about the implications of evolving occupational health, safety, those sorts of areas. Are we able to, at that 20,000 a year, as an option, simply provide those vehicles for hire, and then those community groups can be provided with those, maybe at a largely discounted higher rate, so that they can then essentially take over from where the town of Bassendean used to operate?
Mayor, the reference to $20,000 was the cost of providing the former service, and it was based upon the two vehicles that the town had at the time. Obviously, you can see at the top of page 12 there in the italics that one of the leased vehicles, or the leased vehicle, has since been returned because the lease has run its course. So the town has one vehicle at its disposal, which it owns. It would be open to council to retain ownership of that vehicle and seek to lease it out to individuals or community groups. There would need to be a framework put together for that. There'd be a whole host of discussions that we'd need to have internally to actually have that materialise, but it's certainly something that the town could look at. Again, it's a question of whether that is a matter for local government to be involved in, given that there's no market failure in terms of vehicle hire. There's numerous companies that I could rattle off the top of my head, but I won't, that hire out vehicles to individuals or groups every other day. So council, in making any decision, would need to consider its role and whether they're trying to address any issue of market failure.
Just in terms of that, obviously there are other service providers, but they probably wouldn't be willing to give discounts to groups that operate within our community. But if we were to go down that path, I suppose similar to the other community leasing framework that we have, we could potentially extend that towards one or more vehicles should council be so inclined.
Through Madam Mayor, yes.
Councillor McLennan, would you mind if I just quickly jump in with a follow-on question from, following on from Councillor Polifka's line of thought, obviously the Bayswater model, as I call it, is what Councillor Polifka has been reading in the document. Is there anything to perhaps to stop the council or the administration approaching Bayswater, given they have vehicles already, given that they operate under a basis of offering their own community groups 8 free uses per year of those vehicles, then thereafter they do a hire? Is there any reason why we couldn't potentially liaise with City of Bayswater to see if they might potentially look at hiring one of those vehicles out to our community groups for, say, 8 times a year, instead of giving it to free, like they do their own community groups, to perhaps do a hire agreement with our community groups at a discounted rate?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, we could certainly make inquiries.
I know that they hire out, after those community groups have had the vehicle 8 times during the year, they hire out at a $25 rate per day. But I would assume that if they were going to hire out to, say, a Bassendean community group, they would want something a little bit more than that. I'd be interested in whether that's something we might be able to look at. Councillor McLennan.
Thank you. I'm just seeking to understand the options that were provided by the officers in the report. So, in particular, option 2B, and I recognise that this isn't what is recommended by the staff,
but it provides a de-scoped service with a risk and cost mitigation approach. And two of the points under that option are that the service be limited to healthcare card holders and that it requires users to be ambulatory. I'm a little confused because I recall the discussions when this first came to council late last year, that one of the concerns with the previous service was that it wasn't compliant with disability legislation because it wasn't open to all members of our community. So I'm just not sure how this particular option is something that we could consider. Am I able to get some understanding around that?
Through Madam Mayor, obviously option 2A was to reinstate the original service, which provided for sort of universal access, and there were costs associated with that. 2B is simply seeking to provide council a middle ground if it so chooses. It's not the recommended approach, clearly. The staff recommendation remains consistent in that we do not recommend the service be reinstated. If council was minded to reinstate a service, but not minded to bear the full cost of reinstating the old service, this is a middle ground, and it's certainly not a perfect proposal because it does raise those issues in terms of universal access, but in an effort to provide a third option to council where the cost is more moderated, these were the criteria that staff suggested.
Okay. I'll probably need to talk to you a little bit more just to help understand, because I was of the impression, or under the impression, that a significant portion of the costs that council was quoted to reinstate this existing or the previous service were related to the need to introduce measures like wheelchair hoists and so on. Yet this seems to indicate that that's not necessarily an absolute requirement.
I might jump in, Madam Mayor, if I can. You're absolutely right, Councillor. So the risk mitigation measures we've put in place are no different to what other councils have done. So what we're saying is we're accommodating those people that don't want to be on a Commonwealth package type program, that need to get to medical appointments for doctors and things, because we think there's another way that can happen. This will pick up that social element, and by de-risking it, we mean we're not taking people that have issues around mobility, so our volunteers don't need to be trained to the full extent to give, and they won't be able to give medicine, they won't be able to help the people on and off the bus, because what we're saying is the people that are on the bus are mobile and able, and we're getting them to social events, which is what we think the community is really saying, because we're telling the community council that the federal government has programs in place for everybody else. What we're picking up is that social element, not that high care element.
I'm just trying to clarify that. Well, it's because other people have turned theirs on, sorry. So can you clarify for me, like, for example, the reference to healthcare card holders, does that cover all pensioners or not? Like, I'm just...
I would imagine it would. I mean, also, healthcare card holders don't have to be aged. Obviously, they can be. So what we're saying is we're trying to support the lower socioeconomic people, or the people that are struggling with this service. It's not a service we're providing to everybody. So if you can afford to pay, you should pay and use another service. If you can't afford, this is the last resort that council is providing.
Yeah, and sorry, one last question. In terms of those who are eligible for my-aged care, if somebody didn't have any other needs at present, yet required transport, would they be able to apply just for that service and be likely to be successful if it was a genuine need?
Is that through us or through the federal program?
To be able to access the services, for example, such as Amada and other providers, just trying to make sure that those people that currently or were reliant on the service before, were using the service before, if they were indeed in need of transport and they applied for my-aged care in order to be able to access another service, are they likely to be successful if that's the only need that they currently have for external support services?
I might have to defer to another officer, given that they're closer to that with the divestment earlier on.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I believe so. I think it's reasonably common for the provision of only one service, whether it be transport or assistance with, home care, gardening, meals, those sorts of things. Obviously, that would be a really entry level, and a lot of people progress from there. But I don't think this need for only one service would be an inhibitor.
Councillor Carter, Councillor McWilliam first, then Councillor Carter. Councillor McWilliam put a hand up earlier. Sorry, Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just the question I have is, did the town obtain legal advice when the Work Health and Safety Act 2020 came into effect? And if yes, could this be made available to the councillors, or if staff want to sort of cover what the legal advice was in summary, was in summary, then I'd appreciate that information now or later.
So,
through you, Madam Mayor, we sought advice from WALGA as the sector representative, principally in relation to the town's role as a PCBU and the CEO's role specifically, and it simply reaffirmed our reading of the legislation is that the town in running the community transport service was indeed the PCBU, and the CEO was potentially personally liable.
So just a follow-up question.
Yes.
My understanding is that the Work Health and Safety Act particularly is designed to deal with mining industry, where the risk of death is a very real thing on a day-to-day basis, far more than running community transport services. I'm just wondering what sort of risk was considered in a municipality, local government setting.
So, I will allow the officer to respond to that.
Through Madam Mayor.
Councillors, sorry, maybe I should turn mine off.
As previously advised in previous occasions before council, the risk assessment was done by appropriate staff, and that was on the basis of risk to the volunteers who were, for the purpose of the Act, employees, and effectively made the town the PCBU and the CEO potentially personally liable, but also the risk to the users, given that they are, in some cases, have mobility challenges, and there's some element of manual handling in the form of service. So the risk assessment dealt with both sides of the equation.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you.
Councillor Carter.
My question is around the equity issue. Isn't this a bit misleading, because don't we provide programs for all different sectors in our society? For instance, would I be able to take up skateboarding under the youth program? Do we stop giving, toddlers story time at the library? I mean, we provide things to our people for their need. This saying that everybody, if we provide a bus service for the shopping for elderly people, and we're saying that, okay, then it's open to everyone, why would we say that?
Through to Madam Mayor, I'll just simply address the last question. As set out previously, the Disability Discrimination Act makes it an offence to discriminate against someone based on ability or otherwise. The risk assessment undertaken was that our former community transport service didn't provide access for all community members and only provided access for some community members. And so therefore the risk assessment appropriately identified that that is a statutory and reputational risk, and in terms of trying to mitigate that, one of the responses was to ensure vehicles were able to be universally accessible. If council wants to re-establish a service without universal accessibility, it is open to council to do that, but it is not without risk under the Disability Discrimination Act.
Councillors, unless there's further questions, I'd like to move on to the next item. So we'll move on to Town Centre Area 2 parking review. And I believe this is yourself again, Mr Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider the parking restrictions in and around the Bassendean Town Centre. Staff, as the report sets out, have undertaken a review of the parking signage and restrictions on all thoroughfares in the subject area, as set out on the map on page 19 of the agenda. And that included compilation of observational evidence from the town's ranger services as to the use and occupancy of car parking bays, parking counts, and a review of existing any complaints, comments and requests received from the community regarding parking within the area. The town sought preliminary feedback from landowners and occupiers within the area via a broad survey which provided an opportunity for submitters to report or advise of any issues they experienced within the target area and any suggested resolutions. In response, the town received 56 submissions. 11 of those indicated they have no parking concerns within their road or parking area 2 more broadly, and 2 which requested more information, 2 which requested that no further changes were made. The remaining 43 submissions conveyed at least some concern or made at least some suggestion for parking changes in the precinct. Based on the review and the consultation, it is recommended that Council make a series of minor changes to the parking restrictions in the subject area, and also authorises the town to undertake targeted consultation with the owners and occupiers on Kenny Street, so as to inform future decisions of Council. Relevantly, if councillors go to the recommendation on pages 27 and 28, the recommendation is that council simply authorises staff to undertake subsequent, more particular, targeted, specific consultation on the proposed changes that are provided in the dot points. Once, if council resolves to authorise that, staff will undertake the necessary tasks and bring a subsequent report back to council.
Thank you, Mr Gibson. Councillor McLennan, you have questions?
Yes, thank you. So just acknowledging that we had a resident, April Ward, attend, and I missed which street she was a resident of, but she expressed concerns about us not doing a survey at times later in the evening. I'm just wondering whether the officers think there'd be value in that, and whether there'd be capacity for the rangers to undertake assessment at that time prior to further consultation with the residents.
Mr Gibson.
Through Madam Mayor, I think the lady is referring to Parker Street. In terms of undertaking further observational work, that would be an additional resource, but we could look at resourcing that. Given the occupancy across the whole of parking area 2, where some of the occupancy is as low as 1.5%, I'd suggest there probably isn't a great need, because across the area there does seem to be good parking availability. That said, if council wanted to arm itself with additional information, it would be open to council to do that.
Councillor McWilliam.
Yes, I need someone to do that for me. Thank you. So in relation to page 26, the bottom of page 26 about paid parking, and staff have noted that this is a parking control mechanism that can be used to manage parking where bays are in high demand and generate revenue. And yet we are not really pursuing that at this stage. At the top of page 27 it says, such the introduction of paid parking at this point in time is not warranted. The concern is that it would discourage visitors to the area and have an economic impact on local businesses. I'm just wanting to know, in terms of just flipping that, under what circumstances could the town consider paid parking being instituted in Old Perth Road, for example?
Through Madam Mayor, I'd suggest at the very least the parking occupancy on average should be at least 85%, and that is a measure used by other inner city local governments to determine the threshold. Obviously, with it being in some cases, as I say, as low as 1.5%, we're not really that close. I suppose the second part of the answer would be that it may well be appropriate at a time when the town centre has matured. Obviously, if you walk up and down Old Perth Road now, there is certainly a lot of potential in terms of town centre development, but not a lot of it has played out in practice. So I think it would be at least a number of years away where the town centre matures, we get more development, we get more pressure and stress on the current parking provision. As that occupancy gets closer to that 85% or a number similar, then the town could certainly consider its options in relation to paid parking.
Thank you very much.
Councillors, if you don't mind, I've got a couple of questions. Noting that the survey was done relatively recently, I would assume that it was done while the cork and bottle was closed. Would that be correct?
Through Madam Mayor, the audit was undertaken, started in late 2022, so I'd suggest yes, quite possibly.
Okay. And also the Aegis development, once that's developed, having listened to some of the commentary from some of the ratepayers providing deputations, has there been any anticipated volumes of traffic and parking that will be associated with that development? I'm assuming yes, because Aegis would have had to have provided traffic management plans and various other material when they first got their development application approved. So has that been incorporated into this parking study?
Through Madam Mayor, not as part of this body of work. Parking, like many things at a town centre, is quite dynamic and will change as the town centre changes and matures. So I would suggest this report and reports like this will not be the only one council ever sees. This will be something the council needs to maintain oversight of on an ongoing basis as development proposals materialise, as other developments fail and are replaced with other uses. This thing will change over time. So at the moment and for the last several years, the Aegis site has been vacant, generating next to no vehicle movements. If and when that's ultimately implemented, a future review of parking in the town centre will pick that up.
Okay. Could you perceive that that might provide some issues for council in their approval process if we're approving developments that might negatively impact parking in that area, that not having the information about a development that is going to be built and has a certain level of traffic management required, would it not be advisable to have that information in such a report as this?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'd simply refer to my previous answer.
Okay. Last question. Going back to the point that Councillor McWilliam, or the question that Councillor McWilliam had, if we have certain areas of the town which might become what I would call parking hotspots, would it not be advisable to identify those hotspots, like, for instance, potentially Hamilton Street and Whitfield Street and Old Perth Road? Would these hotspots, would it not be advisable to look at paid parking for those areas and identifying those areas?
Through Madam Mayor, I'd simply refer to the report where it says it's not considered appropriate at this point in time. That's not to say it won't ever be considered appropriate, but this report deals with parking in the town centre now, and future reviews of parking in the town centre will pick up changes and trends, and it may well be that an officer recommendation in the future would recommend that paid parking be implemented.
Thank you. Councillors, Councillor Plifka?
Just following on from your theme, Madam Mayor, question to the Director of Planning. How do we ensure that it doesn't essentially become a first in, best dressed scenario where people can take up the surplus and then it becomes successively more difficult for future proponents to do so?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that would be as part of the decision making that council has to engage in as part of considering applications for development approval. A good example is another item on the agenda tonight. Council is required to consider the applications submitted to it and determine them accordingly. If this council or a subsequent council is of the view that a particular application is not able to be adequately serviced by the parking either on site and or near the venue, it would be open to council in that instance to refuse the application. I suppose the other comment I'd make is that going back to the sort of dynamic nature of a town centre, these reviews should happen periodically, in which case council would have oversight of the trends and changes in parking demand and can actually change and recalibrate the restrictions accordingly.
Councillors, are there any further questions? With that, we'll move on to item 9.3. And Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I won't labour the point because obviously we've discussed it a fair bit tonight. But the purpose of this report is for council to consider an application for development approval for a proposed tavern and incidental microbrewery at 73 to 75 Old Perth Road in Bassendean. The application was advertised in December and January, and at the close of the submission period, the town received 603 submissions. 524 of those were in support, and 79 objecting to the proposal. There is a minor error in the schedule of submissions, as identified by one of the landowners, whereby the town incorrectly suggests submitter number 192 supports the proposal. As you've heard, that's not the case, and that will be rectified during the week. The relevant issues for council's consideration is the appropriateness of the use in the location, the scale of the use relative to car parking provided, as well as noise and traffic. These matters are discussed in the report, and on balance, it is recommended the council approve the application subject to the imposition of a number of conditions. That said, it's open to council to refuse the application, and if it does so, it needs to provide specific reasons at the time of making that decision. Importantly, it's not council's role in this item is to determine the acceptability of the proposal that it has in front of it. It is not council's role to redesign it, so council simply needs to assess the application and determine whether it is to be approved with conditions or refused with reasons.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. So we have Councillor Carter who would like to ask a question, followed by Councillor Ames, followed by Councillor McLennan.
Oh, thank you. Most of the issues that came up tonight were about the Hamilton Street, the intrusion to people who live in Hamilton Street. Is it possible under this that we can protect Hamilton Street by making it residents-only access?
Through Madam Mayor, page 99 of the attachment states that, and this is the applicant's proposal, I'm reading this verbatim, the entrance to the building is clearly identifiable and accessible from the primary street frontage, bracket, Old Perth Road, bracket, ensuring that connection is maintained with existing pedestrian linkages. So it's clear from the application that the intent is to have primary access from Old Perth Road, but noting the comments made by various residents, we can see clarification during the week and report back to council.
Councillor Ames or Councillor McLennan?
Thank you. Just following on from Councillor Carter's question then, there was mention of the 7-point-something metre opening on Hamilton Street, and I hear what Mr Gibson just said about Old Perth Road, in the intention for that to be the primary entrance. However, there will be patrons that also use the Hamilton Street entrance. There was a suggestion from a community member that there'd be some way of closing that entrance off, and I'm just wondering whether that is something that would be an appropriate condition that could be applied to an approval.
Thank you, Councillor.
Through you, Madam Mayor, probably in the first instance, it would be appropriate for staff to make the inquiries with the applicant just to sort of clarify the statement in the application, and then staff can have the discussion about the appropriateness of that condition.
Thank you. So my screen keeps going blank, so I'm sorry for jumping around, but there's reference to various parking requirements under Local Planning Scheme 10 and our Local Planning Policy 8, and then this new draft state government requirements. I'm just wondering how we can make our planning documents align more with what's expected, because there's a huge discrepancy at the moment. And if this was assessed under draft planning scheme 11, what the requirements would have been.
Through Madam Mayor, if it was under local planning scheme number 11, assuming it was gazetted, it would default to the policy. But as council would be aware, once council considers the matter of the draft scheme likely in August, the town would then progress to effectively audit and review its complete suite of local planning policies, and in doing so, reviewing LPP 8, we'd certainly have regard to the department's recent guideline, which was only released a couple of months ago. I will say that it is the paragraph about the DPLH, it's a guidance note. It's not a policy position per se, but it is recommended that local governments in formulating car parking policies have regard to it. So once we do a thorough review of our suite of policies, we would certainly do that.
Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and to the Director of Planning. I've only been on council for a short amount of time, but I'm quite concerned in regards to the amount of adjustments that need to be made from an office recommendation, even though the development application has been in communication with the developer and the town for quite some time, and obviously all the submissions that have come back. Can I ask the reason why we as a council have to decide on all of these amendments when they can be done maybe under your jurisdiction with all these already ticked off? It sounds like we've been, or I feel personally, that we have to make a very large amount of decisions on something that could have already been submitted through discussions that have maybe already come to this point in time. But that's just a question that I'd like to answer.
Councillor, Mr. Gibson.
Through Madam Mayor, putting it succinctly but respectfully, that's council's role. There's an obligation under the Act and under the regs to make these sorts of decisions. There has been a lot of back and forth between the town and the applicant. That's why the report is only coming to council in, we've got May, where it was advertised back in December and January. There's been submission of amended details and plans, a bit of back and forth, trying to resolve the issues as best we can from an administrative level. But the point comes with every application where the applicant is entitled to a ruling, and because of the nature of the application and the fact that there are objections, it falls to council and its quasi-judicial decision-making role to effectively arbitrate and make that decision on behalf of the community.
Could I just ask to provide more clarity to the councillor? It is also a use not listed for our town centre. That's primarily why it would come to council, would it not?
Through Madam Mayor, not primarily, but certainly that's a contributing factor. Any application that prompted, notwithstanding the 500 or so letters of support, any application that attracted 79 objections would certainly find its way to council.
And I really appreciate that respectful reply back, and now understand my full role as a councillor within the community. And then a beer after this, I'll give you the big tip.
Thank you, Councillor Ames. Councillor McLennan, I think you've got another question.
Yeah, thank you. Just acknowledging that there were quite a few suggestions made by members of the community, and also acknowledging what Mr. Gibson has said, that it's not council or the staff's responsibility to redesign a development. I'm just wondering which, if any, of those suggestions would be appropriate to include as conditions. So, for example, there were concerns about antisocial behaviour and those kind of things, which I know are not considered to be proper planning reasons for refusing a development. But I'm just wondering if the things that we heard tonight, if there are some aspects that would potentially be appropriate in addition to the one that we spoke about earlier about the opening.
Thank you, Councillor McLennan. Very good question. Mr. Gibson?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I suppose I'd say relatively few of them. It's certainly open to the applicants, or the applicants who are with us this evening to take the comments on board and sort of seek to swiftly amend elements of their proposal to make it more agreeable to the community and therefore council. But it's certainly not council's role in making the decision to change the fundamental nature of the application. So certainly with respect to the pedestrian access to Hamilton Street, we can talk to the applicants tomorrow and get a bit of clarification there about how that would work. I do note that proposed condition 9 is a management plan, and certainly respecting the comments from one of the community members about their views on management plans. I would say anything involved with the production and sale of alcohol is highly regulated, and the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries regulate it quite heavily. So it wouldn't just be the town as the sole regulatory body for this land use. In terms of redesigning the car park or replacing the rear open area with parking bays, that's not council's role. If council is dissatisfied with the proposal that is in front of it, it is certainly open to council to refuse the application, provide detailed reasons as to why. Obviously, that would then prompt appeal rights, which may or may not be taken up by the applicant, but council, in properly performing its quasi-judicial function, is to either approve it with conditions that don't materially change the proposal, or if it's dissatisfied with what it sees, to refuse it.
Councillor McLennan?
Just, it's more a comment to share with my fellow councillors that if there were things that councillors did want to propose, then I would strongly encourage you to talk to the staff this week rather than waiting to the meeting if there are going to be any conditions and proper planning grounds.
Yes, thank you, Councillor McLennan. I would strongly support that suggestion given the complexity of this particular proposal. Councillor Plithka, you have a question, and I also have questions.
Yes, thank you. For the Director of Planning, so page 102 of the attachments, it lists the shortfall in parking bays at 68 bays, is that correct?
Sorry, councillor, are you looking at docs on tap?
No, the attachments as provided on the website. It is page attachment
Page 10.
10 of is attachment 9.3.1.
Sorry, which attachment was it, Councillor Plithka?
So this is the PDF published on our website, so it's attachment 9.3.1.
Right, yep, got that. And what page were you again?
So it's 10 of that report or 120 of the attachments that are available to the public.
Okay. Okay, got it. It's the graph at the top of the or near the top of the page. So it's under
so it's 3,
parking
3.3.
provisions. So
Thank
3.3. 3.3.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If it's referring to part 6.2.1 of the applicant's document and the requirement for 327 bays, is that correct?
This document says 300 patrons, assuming that you need one car for every 4 people, that's 75 bays. Subtract 7 for the staff bays and it says there's a shortfall of 68.
Traffic impact assessment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For those using Doc Assembler, it's on page 69. If you could repeat the question, please, Councillor.
Or just to confirm, that is that saying what I believe it indicates, that there's a shortfall of 68 bays?
Through Madam Mayor, that's the transport impact assessment conducted by a consultant on behalf of the applicant. The town's parking assessment is contained on page 33 of the agenda.
And so they obviously measuring different things, but on one measure, there's a shortfall of 68 bays.
Through Madam Mayor, based on the consultant using the restaurant land use, yes, they've concluded there's a shortfall of 7 bays.
Oh, 7 or 68?
Apologies, provided 7, shortfall of 68.
Now, there's a follow-up question. In terms of parking bays, or the potential use of parking bays held by Hawaiian, does Hawaiian have any parking bays on council land?
Through Madam Mayor, not that I'm aware of, but just while we're talking about Hawaiian, the question was raised earlier, I'm not sure by who, but when the Hawaiian redevelopment was considered in 2012, 2013, a variation of approximately 330 bays was granted to Hawaiian.
So the concession was made in that instance of that amount. Okay, and if, for example, we had a proponent that used bays at different times to a current large landowner, so that they wouldn't both be looking to access the bays at the same time, say one operated by day and one operated by night, would they be able to essentially share those bays for the purpose of meeting their quotas?
There'd certainly be opportunities for reciprocal access to those bays if they were complementary land uses that had differing peak times. That's not an uncommon mechanism used in the planning system. Going back to the comment about Hawaiians having potential bays on town-owned land, not on any fee simple land in a typical sense, but there is an issue the council will be very much aware of in relation to the West Road Road Reserve that's been presented to council a number of times. So in terms of answering Councillor Prolifica's question, you could sort of contend that yes, there are 100 or so bays, or 80 bays I believe it is, located on town managed land.
So, okay, yep.
But to confirm, it was in excess of 68 bays. So in the road reserve along West Road, potentially in excess of 68 bays are affected by that arrangement.
Through Madam Mayor, I'd have to double check, but I'd be reasonably certain it's more than 68, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Carter.
Oh, just briefly, I'd just like to say that I was on the JDAT when the Hawaiian development was done, and also for the variation. The reason was to protect mature trees very strongly.
So thank you, councillors. I think many of us are aware of the issues around that, and that may be a conversation for another time. At the moment, I have several questions which I would like to ask. On page 34 of the agenda, it outlines that Town of Bassendean does not have a WAPC approved payment in lieu of parking plan. Now, would I be correct, and I accept that we don't have that, and I do accept that some other local governments do, would I be correct in assuming that something like that would flow out of a precinct structure plan?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, quite possibly.
Okay. Would I also be correct in assuming the precinct structure plan could potentially provide all the information that's required to look at future parking requirements given the potential development of the town centre?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, the precinct structure plan would certainly deal with parking and traffic, but I would bring council's attention to its obligation to consider this application for development approval and make a decision to either approve it with conditions or refuse it with reasons.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Do we not have a policy that requires minimal plain walls facing onto Old Perth Road, that the interface between Old Perth Road and businesses should be providing a visual oversight of what's happening on Old Perth Road? Do we not have a policy in that respect?
Through Madam Mayor, we in fact do have a policy. If councillors look at the bottom of page 35 and the top of page 36, I draw your attention to local planning policy number 1. On the top of page 36 in the table, it has the provision that says blank walls should be avoided, and the officer assessment is contained in the section on the right.
Okay, so given we have that policy, can I ask why we have can I ask why this is being supported if that is a policy of the town and the entrance or the facade facing onto Old Perth Road is primarily a brick wall?
Through Madam Mayor, the officer's comment on the matters contained in the officer report. If council is dissatisfied with that aspect of the proposal, noting of course that the town has recommended the matter be conditioned with the submission of details regarding an appropriate treatment. If council is dissatisfied with that as a proposition, it is open to council to refuse the application, citing non-compliance with LPP 1.
Excellent, thank you. My next question relates to the food trucks. So is it conceivable that the existence of on-site food trucks may diminish the benefits of allowing patrons to order food deliveries from outside businesses? Is there any, was there any potential percentage that might have been provided by the proponents about what volume of food might be consumed on site by using the food trucks as opposed to ordering in from nearby businesses?
Through Madam Mayor, not that I'm aware of, and I suppose further I'd probably suggest it's not a relevant planning consideration.
But it has been reinforced steadily through the documentation provided, so that's why it's of interest to me, because it was mentioned so many times. But anyway, Councillor McLennan, you've got a question.
Thank you. Yeah, just following on from your question about non-compliance with local planning policy 1, specifically the blank walls facing onto Old Perth Road. I note that the officers make reference to this being more a change of use application rather than a development application. And I'm just wondering, given that, whether that would be a sound reason if council was going to refuse it, especially acknowledging that with the Aegis development, which was a new development that also had blank walls onto Old Perth Road that wasn't really compliant with local planning policy 1, that it was still approved, and that was not considered something that was of significant enough concern to warrant it being a refusal or a condition.
Interesting question.
Through Madam Mayor, from a professional point of view, I'd suggest no, there would not be sufficient grounds to defend that, principally because the walls are already there, and if this application is either refused or even if it's approved and not implemented, the status quo is very likely to remain.
Councillor Plivka?
You're just coming to the fact that I think the Director of Planning said it was a use not listed. When we consider uses that aren't listed, can we consider them by reference to analogous uses? For example, this is described as a brew pub, but how does that differ from a hotel, which is a D-listed usage in the current planning scheme?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the tavern use is the fundamental use at play here. The term brew pub has been thrown around quite colloquially, but the primary use on site is a tavern. It is, as you've heard from the applicants, it's for the retail sale of alcohol to be consumed on site. There is an incidental and minor brewing process, or part of a brewing process that occurs on site, but that is largely incidental to the primary use of tavern. As set out at the bottom of page 31, tavern is an A use, which means it is not permitted unless council grants approval for it. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the term brew pub, because that was more a casual term that was used potentially by the applicant early on.
Again, just to understand, so the difference between the tavern and the hotel usages, what distinguishes one from the other?
Through Madam Mayor, hotels typically provide accommodation, whereas this is simply the retail sale of alcohol to be consumed on site, which is more appropriately categorised as a tavern.
Great, thank you.
Councillor McLennan.
Oh, thank you. Just going back to the concerns around parking, in no way like foreshadowing a decision of council, but if council was minded to refuse the application because of concerns about parking, I'm just wondering whether there's been any conversations with the applicant around a capacity to modify plans to accommodate parking, or whether that would completely make the development non-viable. And I know there's references in the report, but has that specifically been a conversation? And if so, what's been the thrust of that?
Through Madam Mayor, there's been lots of discussions with the applicant. Given the delay in getting it to council because of the submission of further information, there's obviously been discussion between the town and the applicant. The concern has been raised with the applicant because obviously it was communicated to the town via a number of submissions, and the town's own assessment found there was a not insignificant shortfall on the base policy numbers. But bottom line is that the applicant is seeking approval for what is in front of council now. If council was to refuse it for whatever reason, the ball would effectively back in the applicant's court to do one of a number of things. It could seek to have the matter reconsidered or have reviewed by the SAT with or without changes. They could lodge a subsequent application at a different scale, or they could simply walk away from the proposal altogether. But yeah, I simply want to stress for councillors that the role in determining this application for development approval is to approve it with conditions if it considers it appropriate to do so, or refuse it, and in doing so provide quite specific reasons, because those reasons may well be relied upon as part of any subsequent SAT proceedings.
Okay, if I could ask a follow-up question, Mr. Gibson. If council was of a mind to reject the food trucks, what sort of impact do you perceive that having on the application?
Through you, Madam Mayor, as the report sets out, is if council seeks to impose conditions that would potentially limit the operation of the venue, it would be very much open to the applicant to seek review at SAT. In terms of the commercial viability of that change, that would really be a question for the applicant.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, councillors, do we have further questions? Okay, I would encourage councillors, if you've got further questions, to submit them to the administration as soon as possible. Okay. So, councillors, with that, 9.4 was dealt with at the beginning of the meeting. We'll now move to 9.5, which is use not listed, short stay accommodation, lot 1, 3rd Avenue, Bassendean. And Mr. Gibson, again, you're very popular tonight.
I don't think so, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is for council to consider an application for development approval for short stay accommodation at units 1 to 8, number 63 3rd Avenue, Bassendean, as directed by the State Administrative Tribunal. Council previously refused the application on the basis that the proposed use may result in an accumulation of adverse impacts at a scale that may detrimentally affect the amenity of the local area in a manner that would not be reasonably expected in an existing low-density residential context. As we've heard, the applicant has subsequently appealed the decision to the SAT, and SAT has now directed Council to reconsider the matter. As the report sets out, and whilst the proposal involves a number of departures from the relevant local planning policy, and whilst the land use, if not managed appropriately, has the potential to result in adverse impacts on nearby residents, the site has been operating for over 4 years with no formal complaints raised with the town regarding the operation of the proposal. The town acknowledges that the revised information includes a detailed management plan, which includes noise monitoring and CCTV devices to help mitigate any adverse impacts, be it from individual units or from an accumulation impact on the surrounding locality. It is therefore recommended that Council sets aside its decision of the 22nd of November last year and resolves to approve the application subject to a number of conditions listed in the staff recommendation. That said, it is open to Council to affirm its original decision to refuse, in which case it is likely that the SAT matter will progress to a full hearing.
Councillors, questions? With that, we will move on to the next item. So, 9.6, which is excise of a portion of the BIC reserve, and this would be Mr. Gibson again.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Last one from me this evening. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider requesting that the Minister for Lands amend the boundary of BIC Reserve, excising what is effectively the 1,000 square metre portion of the site that currently accommodates the infant health clinic. That action is consistent with the draft LPS 11 and the Council adopted land asset strategy and Council adopted Town Centre Master Plan, and could potentially assist the State Government in providing additional social housing in appropriate locations. It is recommended the Council support the proposal, noting that the ultimate decision rests with the Minister for Lands, who also happens to be the Minister for Housing and Minister for Homelessness.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. Councillors, questions on this one? Mr. Gibson, if I could ask a question, noting on page 64 of the agenda, the red outline for what is the BIC reserve, I note that the portion that houses the library, the civic facilities and the seniors is actually not included in that red line, and that is the front of that portion out the front of the chambers is an A-class reserve, because that's where the war memorial used to be. So I'm just curious about why that's not included into the BIC land.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's simply a separate reserve.
Okay, thank you for that. So, again, pardon my ignorance here, but if the land is excised, is this relinquishing the management orders, or is this the town becoming the owner of the land? This, I assume it's relinquishing the management orders, but I just wanted clarity on that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct. That'll be the intended outcome, is the town relinquish any control over it, and the 1,000 square metre site would thereafter be at the sole control of the State Government through the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage, and could be released to the market for residential development purposes.
Okay. Councillor Plivka?
It would assist me in making that decision to understand what measures, if any, have been taken into in respect of the last parcel of land upon which we relinquished the management order, being the Wilson Street car park. Has anything material happened in relation to that which can be disclosed in this forum?
Through Madam Mayor, there's certainly been discussions between department staff and town staff in various site meetings. The department's also been undertaking some investigations of the site, principally geotechnical investigations. I understand there's a bit of work being done behind the scenes in terms of yield analysis, but that's being obviously run by the DPLH, with the town being involved as the department sees fit.
Thank you.
Councillor Ames?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Mr Gibson. What's the overarching benefit of us approving this moving forward next week?
Through Madam Mayor, I'd suggest one's practical, one's reputational. In terms of the reputational, it would be a good signal that the town is genuinely committed to the outcomes foreshadowed by the council adopted master plan. It's somewhat opportunistic and on the basis of a recent announcement by the state government in terms of additional funding for social housing. So that's really what prompted this matter to come to council now, because it could have easily been a matter that was dealt with down the road a bit. But given that announcement, it seemed opportune to actually get on the front foot and potentially show that council is very much committed not just to town centre development, but the provision of social housing in town centre locations. It would remove an asset management obligation or asset management burden in terms of the improvement on site, in which case it would become a state asset to manage. So the benefits are largely practical, because it could obviously provide housing opportunities in the town centre, providing the opportunities for the individuals to be provided a roof over their heads, but also for the town to become a bit more well populated and active. But it also would reflect positively on the town and council that it's A, trying to implement its master plan, and B, assisting where it can in terms of providing social housing.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously it states in the very beginning that it was requested by the minister to the town.
No.
Through Madam Mayor, no, this is a town proposal.
Town proposal, okay.
Councillor Plifka?
Just on the issue of reputational damage, do we foresee there being any in departing from the long-standing stated intention of the Bassendean Improvement Committee to have that land available as public open space?
Through Madam Mayor, I'd suggest there's very little risk with that. Council has made a series of decisions on the master plan, the land asset strategy, and the draft local plan scheme number 11 that all point to the same outcome, and that is for that 1,000 square metres to be developed for residential purposes.
Sorry, I'm just trying to frame this. Given that in the past, as referenced by one of our residents for some considerable time, there was previously a process where a local government could purchase Crown-owned land for a fraction of its value. May I ask if there has been any consideration of this portion being excised with the view for the town to actually end up owning that portion?
Through Madam Mayor, the short answer is no. It's considered that the best value the town and council can add to this situation is to simply allow the state government to take control of it. The state government's obviously far better resourced in terms of land divestment and land management and land development. There is a dedicated land development stream and land investment stream that the department runs. So whilst the town could seek to acquire it in freehold, it's considered a better option to simply seek the department take control of the site.
The only reason I ask this is because clearly there is a lot of money around for social housing. However, there seems to be a roadblock with construction of that housing. So I'm curious about whether there might be alternative pathways to development of that site, perhaps cooperative housing or things along those lines. That's why I asked that question about moving forward to achieve housing, whether there are other opportunities. So I think I'll leave that. That's obviously, we'll have another conversation about it, I think. Councillors, Councillor Plifka.
Just following on from the Mayor's point, if the land in being made available to the market were sold for valuable consideration, would the state government be able to make some portion of those proceeds available to a small local government with a large amount of river frontage?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it would be able to. I'd suggest it'd be quite unlikely it would.
It's all right, we're all there.
If I could go on with a question. With state government's desire for social housing, is it envisaged what percentage of this, if the site was developed, is it envisaged what percentage of the site would be social housing? There are obviously some regulations around that. I'm just curious what they are.
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, we've not envisaged that. The report before council is simply for council to participate as best it can, in staff's opinion, and that is to divest from it and hand the reins over to the state government. Obviously there are quotas and there are benchmarks that the state government works towards, but I would suggest that is a matter for the state government to either address themselves if they were to develop it through their own mechanisms, or address with a prospective purchaser if it's sold on the open market.
Okay, so if it was sold on the open market, then there are percentages of the development that can be social housing. My question is more along the lines of, if it's developed by the state government, is there potential for the entire site to be social housing, given some of the issues that has created in the past? You don't know.
Through Madam Mayor, I'd suggest yes, it's potentially the case. I don't think it's contemporary practice, but that'd be a matter for the state government, I'd suggest.
Okay. Councillor Carter.
Oh, thank you. The question is, if the state government haven't taken up the offer to redevelop the Wilson Street car park area, which was far bigger, far more access points, and far easier to develop, why would they bother with this little parcel?
Through Madam Mayor, the state government is exploring development, or at least divestment of the Wilson Street car park. Council made that decision in September. Like I say, there have been investigations at the department's end since then, so I would suggest the contention is actually incorrect, is that they would be looking to either develop themselves or release it to the market for housing, and I'd suggest much the same would apply to this site.
Councillors, if there's no further questions, we'll move on to the next item, which is 9.7, draft unreasonable customer conduct. Councillor McWilliam, did you have a question on that item?
Yes, I do. Thank you,
I'm
Mayor.
so sorry, I didn't realise, I apologise. On this one or the previous item?
This one.
Okay, thank you. This is CEO's item, I believe, so would you like to speak to this item at all? Or?
Madam Mayor, I think Matthew is going to from governance, from a governance point of view.
Okay.
Thanks, Matt.
Would you like to hear my question first?
The question's about the previous item, isn't it?
Just let the gentleman speak to it first, Matthew, and then we'll...
Sorry, Councillor, is your question for this item or the 9.6?
It's for the unreasonable customer conduct policy.
I'll present a report and then questions afterwards. Is that
okay?
Right? Yeah. Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider adopting the policy titled Unreasonable Customer Conduct. The draft policy is attached. The policy outlines how the administration, with discretion through the CEO, would respond to and manage customers deemed unreasonable in their conduct. As the report outlines, and in the background there's the different criteria, I guess, that would come under an unreasonable banner. The policy is to manage those extreme circumstances where the administration is unlikely to ever be able to resolve the concern or issues of the customer however persistent or constant their contact. The administration has in the past and is currently managing customers who are disproportionately taking resources of the administration staff, and this policy would allow the CEO to manage these situations in a consistent and justified manner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just by way of preface, I've worked for many years in the justice area and courts and community corrections and indeed in prisons, and have been exposed to people, customers and clients, if you like, who are behaving very unreasonably. I've been concerned for some time that our customer service doesn't have an appropriate level hiked counter, and that's probably one of the things that might be resolved if they move to the library. I don't know, but I do think I'm not sure that I'm on the right track, but I think a zero tolerance approach to this sort of thing is really important.
So, Councillor McWilliam, coming to a question?
Yes, I am.
Sorry.
Does the policy have aspects to it where staff are to remove themselves from the scene? There is a closure of the front of the office, and that the police or the ranger is called at least.
So
I haven't looked at the attachment till we've ages to find the attachments.
Right. Through you, Madam Mayor, I might see if the Director of Corporate Services might be better placed to answer that question.
Thanks, Matthew, and through you, Madam Mayor. This, I think the intent of this policy is slightly different, but we certainly have procedures in place to deal with our customer service centre, which is obviously the direct physical interface between many of our staff and customers. We have completed a risk assessment of the area and are currently implementing the recommendations from that risk assessment. The staff have been trained in how to deal with unreasonable conduct. There are duress alarms in place that are operational, and we recently conducted some refresher training in terms of what to do with specific incidents, and the staff are instructed to terminate any interaction that is unreasonable, not that just presents a risk to physical injury, but staff are not paid to come to work and put up with abuse from community members, and they're instructed not to, and to terminate any interaction, whether that be a phone conversation or a interaction at the customer service counter.
thank you, Mr. White. Councillor Carter?
Oh, I think that just about answers my question. Thank you very much. Do we have a notice that says we will not tolerate this sort of behaviour to staff?
I'm in the queue. Here we go. Through you, Madam Mayor, we have a we don't think we do at the moment, but that is one of the recommendations. So if it's not there now, it should be imminently. We also have a customer service charter that's available on the town's website, which I guess talks about expectations from both ways. It talks about what the community can expect from us in our dealings with the community, but also what we are entitled to expect in the community's sort of behaviour towards staff.
Thank you. Councillor Ames?
Just a quick one, and this could be just maybe an open discussion, but was there any sort of thought process, and Councillor McLennan, we sort of had to touch on this in regards to what our new community or customer sort of service area would sort of be officially named. Is customer the right terminology to use? I know it's transacting scenario, but is it like a community member, or do we have a raft of different examples or explanations of who we're dealing with, and then follow on in the policy just with one?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not sure if it's been considered as part of this policy. It certainly hasn't been considered by me in terms of the person responsible for managing the customer service centre, but it's not. That doesn't mean it can't be considered in the future.
I think, obviously, just from my personal perspective, we can just discuss it now. I know it's getting late, but customers seems transactional, and we want to obviously focus on a community scenario. Maybe if we have this unreasonable community conduct, there actually might be less argy-bargy in the first place. I don't know. It might be more of a wordsmithing opportunity for the administration. That's all.
I think through you, Madam Mayor, I think the main area that we're looking to remedy by this policy is not so much the problems that we might have, which are fairly rare from a customer service perspective. It's the day-to-day demands that are placed on council staff by unreasonable requests from community members who continually seek the same information over and over and over again, and as a result diverts not insignificant resources away from activities that staff really should be doing to value add to the community.
So, thank you, Councillor.
It's a great way to put it, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Plivka.
Following on from what Councillor Ames was discussing, if we just go to the beginning of the policy objective, probably the first two dot points there, we could potentially remove the word complainants after each of those, because I don't think we need to characterise the people. If they're dealing with the town, then that's sufficient, so that there may well be community members, they could be tradespeople of some sort that we're engaging from elsewhere. I think what I gather the intention is to protect our staff, so I mean, potentially if we could, rather than labelling people, focus more on how we're trying to protect our staff and the town staff, and essentially pick up the language of the occupational health and safety legislation. And I think in terms of that, in the document itself, the word intimidate was only used in relation to written correspondence. So just potentially, would we be able to adopt that language? And so we made that, I think the language is along the lines of intimidate and harass. So just to pick up the legislative language, is that something we could do to, and focus more, I suppose, on our staff as opposed to worrying about the people that we're dealing with, but just to say, well, these are the circumstances that we're prepared to expose our staff to, and anything beyond that is unacceptable, and those people will be cut off from having an interaction with the town.
Sorry, thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. Those amendments can be considered as part of anything that the council was to put forward. But as Paul mentioned, the intent of this policy is not so much the direct, to use the term, customer facing at 35 Old Perth Road or wherever that may be, but it's the administration burden for consistent contact and those that take the staff unreasonable time to consider and those that are considered that the CEO would consider to unlikely to ever be resolved in that issue. So in terms of an aggressive complainant, that's one side of it, but there's also the other side in terms of unreasonable intent of a customer or a community member.
Can I just ask a question that relates? Would it be possible to, because the CEO and I spoke about the Ombudsman's description of what constitutes unreasonable customer conduct. So would it be possible to maybe send that out to councillors, because it's quite a short, sharp description, but it possibly will put in context exactly what this policy is directed at?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, that can be sent out. And as the report states, this policy was done was drafted with regard to that guideline set out by the Ombudsman and other local governments. So it's definitely been drafted in that way.
Okay. Councillors, do we have further questions on this? Councillor Ames?
Real quick and through you to Matthew. Can you throw councillors in there as well?
We have a code of conduct.
Yes, so any conduct that covers staff will also cover councillors. So if you want that to be made explicit, that can be done through an amendment.
I believe I think I read that in there, in the policy. Sorry, I haven't got the policy open, so I can't tell you the page. So, councillors, if there's no further questions, we'll move on to 9.8. Children's Services Daily Fee for Wind in the Willows Early Education Centres for 2023-24. Do we have any questions on this item? Councillor Plivka.
I see we're looking to increase it to 136. Having regard to the giveaways in the most recent budget, even with that increase, will people be in a worse position than what they were previously or not?
Mr. White.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think it depends on their individual circumstances. It's proposed to be a $9 increase, which is 7%. As the report states, we believe that's required and largely driven by increases to employee costs. Mindful that there is a childcare subsidy that most families are entitled to, and there obviously are some significant changes coming up in that area shortly. It's possible that families could be worse off by the net increase, so the $9 less whatever the childcare rebate they receive on a per day basis. But I don't know the individual what the individual figures would be across the family groups.
But there is potentially the bulk of people using this service could still be better off as a result of the measures that have been announced in the most recent budget.
Yes.
I think from memory, the concessions or the assistance tops out at I think 530,000.
That's right. Largely in terms of the income tests for families being significantly relaxed.
So we would envisage it would capture the bulk of families. The concessions that have been granted.
It's difficult to think of a situation that wouldn't be captured in some way.
All right, and I suppose in terms of benchmarking the rate against comparable commercial enterprises in the vicinity, do we have any figures in that regard?
Yes, we do. I think it's on page. Where is it? Sorry, my thing's a bit slow to open up here. It's up at page 72. The fees range from around $100 to $142.50 in around the town of Bassendean, not all within the town of Bassendean. There are some slight differences in the services. The services that are around $100 sometimes don't provide meals and things, and families have to provide their own meals. So the town is at the upper end of the price range, and we are proposing to stay there. And I would argue that we make no apologies for that. We offer a premium service. Our services are rated as exceeding the national quality standards, and there's strong demand for both services. I did just want to make a comment while I've got the microphone, if councillors don't mind, just in relation to the officer recommendation. I believe that it just needs to be framed in terms of the annual budget. Council isn't really able to adopt this now in advance of the annual budget for next year. What we're seeking for council to do is to give staff and the community a clear indication of what it's likely to do when it comes to adopt the budget. So I was hoping to add some words to the end of the officer recommendation that say, for the purposes of the draft 2023-24 annual budget. So the full recommendation would read that council adopt a daily fee of $136 for Wind in the Willows Bassendean Early Childhood Education and Wind in the Willows Ashfield Early Childhood Education for 23-24 for the draft 23-24 annual budget.
Councillors, if there's no further questions, we'll move on to the next item. Now, the next two items, the next two items have obviously confidential attachments. So, councillors, I'd appreciate if we don't wander into those confidential attachments with our questions, because if we do, we have to go behind closed doors. So, the next item is 9.9 contract variation for security monitoring and maintenance of security equipment. Did you want to speak to this?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. So the report's fairly self-explanatory. The purpose is to consider a contract variation. I just wanted to really note to council that it was actually open for the administration to approve this variation. However, it was considered appropriate to bring it to council due to the percentage requested being 14.2%, noting that had this been over the relevant threshold, it would have needed to come to council, being over 5%. And also, we're aware of recent discussions around contract variations and delegations, and council is interested in this area. So the proposed variation does represent a 14.2% increase in the contracted price. It's sought fairly soon after contract award, and the reason provided by the contractor is that a subcontractor that they use went out of business, and they had to re-award the works for their security call-outs. The additional cost to the town is fairly small. It's in the confidential attachment because it's not a heavy used service, and it is something that we're certainly looking to reduce through improved liaison with the user groups. And the only final point I wanted to mention was that had the contractor submitted their tender response with the higher rate as they have proposed via this variation, they still would have been awarded the contract as the cheapest tenderer. So it's recommended that council approve the variation.
Thank you, Mr. White. Questions, Councillor Ames?
Just a quick one. Are we happy with CASA's service delivery and call outs and their general sort of ways in which they do their business around the town?
Through you, Madam Mayor, certainly from a corporate services perspective, I don't know, Phil, whether you want to comment from an infrastructure perspective?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, we're comfortable with their service. Yeah.
There have been times, Councillor, where they have been 2 minutes because they sit in the car park having their dinner. Anyway, moving on. Next item, councillors, is 9.10, supply and installation of a bore at Ashfield Reserve. Any treat on this one?
Thank you, and Madam Mayor, and very, very quickly through you. The purpose of this report is for council to consider the tender submissions for the supply and installation of the bore. The town received 2 offers from one tenderer. Unfortunately, they were both assessed by the tender evaluation panel as being non-compliant for the reasons that are set out in the report, and it's recommended that council decline all offers. Should council do so, we anticipate that we'll be ready to go and re-tender to the market very quickly, and have a more aggressive strategy in place in terms of approaching potential contractors and encouraging them to submit to a re-tendered offer from the town.
Thank you, Mr. White. Councillors, any questions on this one? Okay, so there's no